Unified School District. May we have a roll call?
Superintendent Wells.
Here.
President Tutain.
Here.
Vice President Doss.
Here.
Trustee Clark.
Here.
Trustee Hinckley. Here. Trustee Duran.
Here.
Student Board Member Weinstein.
She's coming.
She's late. Okay. And Student Board Member Mala.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry about that, guys. Student Board Member Malat is on her own tonight. I wonder if I could ask another trustee to read the mission, please, the mission and vision statement.
Sure.
Go right ahead, Vice President Doss.
The mission of Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student.
Student Board Member, would you like to read our meeting norms, please?
1, maintain a focus on what is best for our students. 2, show respect, never dismiss or devalue others. 3, be willing to compromise. 4, disagree when necessary, agreeably. 5, make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening with an open mind while others are allowed to express their points of view. 6, participate by building on the thoughts of a fellow board member. 7, make a commitment to open communication and honesty, no surprises. 8, commit the time necessary to govern effectively. 9, be collaborative. 10, maintain confidentiality, which leads to the building of trust. 11, look upon history as lessons learned. Focus on the present and the future.
Thank you very much. That brings us to our item number 5, approval of the agenda. Would anyone like to make changes to the agenda? Can I get a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And that brings us to our spotlight. Superintendent Wells, would you like to introduce?
Tonight, I have the good fortune to have some forward thinkers in the field of history. One day I was visiting Albany High School, and I walked into a history class, and I ran into Michelle, who enthusiastically started to share with me about their ethnic studies approach that's fused throughout history, because absent of that, you can't have real history. And I came back and talked to the school board president and talked about how this would be a nice opportunity to have this featured, because right now California is trying to figure out how they infuse ethnic studies as part of their history. And here at Albany High School, a wonderful group of teachers have already done that. And I think they could be a good group and a model for the state of how to do this kind of work. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Michelle. And Michelle, if you would take a moment to introduce your whole team, that would be great.
There's 2 documents, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Lausheim, and I'm the department chair for the History Social Science Department at the high school. And we have Kevin James here. He teaches government econ and AP comparative government and world religion. We have Miriam Walden, who teaches world history and business. And we have Emily Surowitz, who teaches IHS at the high school, and she also teaches U.S. history, the core class with the junior English. So thank you for inviting us, because we've been working really hard as a department the last few years, especially as we've implemented an ethnic studies elective course at the high school. As department chair, we've been able to have really difficult and also interesting conversations about what we want to see in our classrooms, especially the core classes. And so in the last couple of years, we actually had many conversations about what we want our students to take away from the classroom. And so we developed a mission statement that I wanted to share with you. The AHS Social Studies Department helps our students to develop the skills necessary to participate fully in civil society, including developing a strong and confident personal identity and a deep appreciation for multiple perspectives rooted in an understanding of our shared history. So tonight, hopefully, we will get to give you a glimpse of how that pans out in all of our core classes that each Albany High student takes in the career at the high school. So we see ethnic studies as an important topic that we actually see that as part of our core curriculum. So every social study teachers addresses the following themes that we're going to look at, amongst others in their class, through individual style, through collaborative work, and also responding to student needs in the classroom. And so issues of race and identity are developed in sequence over the entire 4 years of social studies. And so what we've gathered for our themes and also interweaving ethnic studies into our core classes, IHS in 9th grade year, we want our students to reflect on identity, develop a historical cultural knowledge. And so through their curriculum, they will interweave these themes. While U.S. World History, 10th grade year, it's elevating the less heard perspectives in the development of the modern world. U.S. History is uplifting the history of people of color and other marginalized groups within the United States, while U.S. Government and Economics, senior year, they're looking at institutionalized racism through the government and economic systems. And so tonight I have my lovely colleagues that are going to share an example of how that works out in their classrooms. But before that, I just want to share with you about ethnic studies. So ethnic studies was actually approved the summer of 2017. I also was able to get the UC A through G approval that same summer. And so at the high school right now, it's an elective course. It's a one-year elective course. And so since 2017 in the fall, this is our 3rd year of having ethnic studies. So far, because it's an elective, we have one section each year. Roughly between 24 students my first year I taught it to 30 starting this year. We've now actually have a smaller number because of the attrition of classroom changes. I only have one section, so there's not a whole lot of ability to accommodate people who have to change their schedule. So the goal of ethnic studies in my elective class is basically investigating the struggles confronted by communities of color throughout history, studying ethnicity, class, and gender, and those relationships. I'm hoping that students can develop their own unique and informed understanding about social inequalities in the United States. And so to give you a kind of quick outline, I do use the traditional curriculum of looking at Native American studies, African American studies, Latinx, Chicanx American studies, and Asian American studies. But I do add in other things, looking at local history, personal stories. We have just finished our introductory of implicit bias. Before we can talk about these important topics, we have to acknowledge how the brain works and acknowledge some of our own personal implicit bias. At the end of the school year, I also kind of leave way for conversations about activism, privilege, and also racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, and ableism. And I actually end the course in looking at intersectionality, having students reflect on what they've learned and how their personal experiences shape who they are and how they all cross paths. So In the conversation of the state implementing a ethnic studies curriculum, I actually looked at the model curriculum and I just took a few of the general principles and the course outlines and just I wanted to bring attention to how these things in the ethnic studies proposed curriculum are things that we think as a history department is important that we have. So including accurate information, promoting values of civic engagement and civic responsibility, promoting self and collective empowerment. These are all things that we value and we try to bring out in each of our courses. And so from even the course outline of including local, state-specific, national, global inquiry, and also looking at a range of disciplines beyond kind of the traditional history. We try to bring in the visual and performing arts or other English language arts, economics, gender, sexuality, all of those things we also include, not just in ethnic studies. So I just want to give a moment for my colleagues to share and give you an example of how that pans out and what that looks like in the classroom.
Hi, I'm Emily Sarowitz. I teach social studies, IHS, and U.S. history. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some important aspects of the social studies overlap in the IHS class. IHS is interesting. It's identity, health, and society, and it is part of the social studies department, but you need to have a health credential to teach it. So it's a really enriching class to teach, but it's also challenging because we're tasked with a lot. And so in our identity unit, in media literacy throughout the year, and in the Freshman Forum Project, we really are social studies teachers to the truest sense. And so I was very happy last year when the school district unveiled the social justice and social emotional standards because they lend themselves perfectly to my class. And in fact, for the semester final, I used them. I had students write a reflective piece about how they're working towards those because we talk about how they're lifelong learning goals. But just a couple quick examples of how important some core concepts in the identity unit are. So I'm just going to tell you what I did today. Today, I was actually using the poster about understanding inequities because we were talking about implicit bias and confirmation bias and how they see this so often in their lives on social media and in the media generally. And then we started to talk about historical examples of these kinds of things. And when something is entrenched in a society and in a history, it, in implicit or unconscious ways, shapes opportunities and expectations for people. And so we went back in time and we were looking at the National Geographic, actually last year on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, wrote a reflective editorial piece in the beginning of a series on race and ethnicity about they were owning up to the racism of their magazine. And it was so powerful because it had the images and the captions, and it walks kids through time in understanding what institutional racism looks like. And so it helps the kids through a unit on identity, which is who are they in the world, how do they conceptualize their abilities and their confidence to become not just thinkers, but hopefully leaders and people who seek a place at the table down the road. How can they understand their society today with their, I'm going to say this later in U.S. history, but with their eyes wide open to how we've gotten to this place in time. And so we're doing all of this to build a foundation for core texts that we adopted in the identity unit, which are the 57 bus. I'm not sure if you're familiar by Dashka Slater, but we read it. We've been reading it now. This will be the third year. And if you haven't read it, it's a narrative nonfiction retelling of a true story, and it's back to school night. I described it as like this tragically beautiful human story about human behavior and how complicated we are as human beings and how complicated our society really is. And certainly within the text is a sound understanding of the evolution of a society's willingness to see gender identity, also institutional racism in the criminal justice system. But as the book has become more popular, more and more kids are coming into the 9th grade having read it. And so the alternative text that I started offering last year is called Our America. And it was a NPR radio broadcast, but it's the transcript and photographs of that, which is from actually the late 90s, but 2 kids living in the Ida B. Wells projects on the south side of Chicago, showing what their America is like. And so at the beginning of my class, I asked kids to make 2 commitments, which is that I forgot to write them down, but oh, no, I didn't. I wrote them in my vision statement. They're on my wall, which is basically that they'll open their minds to other perspectives and build empathy, growing as learners and people, and that in doing so, they'll listen and learn from their classmates, and learn to care for themselves and others. And so, I don't know, I care really passionately about this class. And then we jump into like helping them understand the way to have a foundation in dealing with mental health challenges and their sexual health and their, other various aspects of health. And then in the end of the year, close to the end of the year, we come back to that really important social studies core with the Freshman Forum project. And a few of the topics, we have a bunch, like 10 topics, but a few of the topics that we feel embed not just ethnic studies, but real world problem solving and the social justice and social emotional standards in the Freshman Forum project. We're increasing voter turnout in the United States, reducing mass incarceration, and improving the disproportionate impact police brutality has on communities of color. That's from last year's forum. It's ever evolving. So it's kind of an overview. Thank you.
So in world history, I get to inherit these kids who already can use the word intersectionality and understand privilege, and then we can take it to a whole nother level and look at the whole globe. What you see on this side is an outline that the state gives me, and the way the state imagines that, it's European history, and I've spent the last 14 years of my life trying to figure out how to make it not a European history course. And so I'll give you an example. The state tells me that I should look at the evolution of democratic ideas by talking about the French, American, and English revolutions. And so I do that, but I also teach a modern unit on the struggle in Hong Kong. And I also teach a whole longer unit on the revolutions that happened in the Americas. And we start with Haiti and look at the culture in Haiti, which is a mix of West African and indigenous culture. And we look at sugar slavery and the politics that formed Haiti. And then we look at the Haitian Revolution, and we compare different revolutionaries in Haiti and their ideas about freedom and their ideas about what kind of government would work for their people when they had achieved their ideas of freedom. And then we take that understanding of how race politics played out in Haiti and in the conversation about democracy and in government, and we look then at the independence war in Mexico, and then at the independence war that brought us Gran Colombia, the countries that we now call Colombia. Gonna have an elderly moment on my other countries, but it's from Panama all the way across the northern half of South America. So that's just an example of one way that we can take this curriculum and pound out the corners and find all of the angles to look at the important cultures around the world. And then we just continue that all the way through. So the Industrial Revolution, instead of just looking at England, which is what the curriculum asked me to do, we also look at China and study China in ancient times and modern times as it did and didn't have an industrial revolution. Imperialism's pretty obvious because we get to study the whole world. But how do we perceive the players in the modern imperialism not as victims and conquerors, but as fully realized cultures with strong identities that came together in a way that disadvantaged some and advantaged others, so that we're not misunderstanding or under-understanding the fullness of what has happened in the world. So it's a really great class, and we really like teaching it, and I think this is definitely the foundation that sets us up to look at ethnic studies as a U.S. issue in the 11th grade year.
Okay, And now I'm here to talk specifically about a core class I teach, junior core. So it's a collaborative and integrated 11th grade U.S. history, 11th grade American literature course. I've been teaching it since the 2014-15 school year. And it is one section. Myself and my teaching partner, Juliet Radford, we have the kids in back-to-back blocks with lunch in between on a Wednesday, Friday, so 4-6. And we did that on purpose so that we could, in addition to having, I think, an opportunity to go much more in depth in in-depth and enriching in our studies, we wanted to be able to have the opportunity to go off campus and learn from our world. And so our biggest goal has always been that we want to help the student. It's tough as a history teacher, but incredibly important to understand how to teach them about the world as it is, again, with their eyes wide open, understanding the really varied and intersectional experiences. One of our core questions is like to understand the intersecting systems of privilege and oppression that have existed in our country, but to leave feeling confident and empowered. And so we think about that all the time in how we teach. And so just a few examples of how we do that are that, so I'm borrowing a phrase from Toni Morrison, National Amnesia. She talked about that when she published Beloved in the 90s, but we're using that, and we always use that idea, is it national amnesia, to understand the essence of the legacy of the failures of Reconstruction today. But I'm using it now to think about various Native American voices as well. So my core partner has been reading Sherman Alexie, and now she's reading Sarah Vowell. It's called The Face I See When I Look at the $20 Bill, where she is of Cherokee descent, and she essentially road trips one of the 5 routes of the Trail of Tears. And my students are having an in-depth case study on the Cherokee specifically, so that we can really understand the genocide that occurred that Americans across the country often have put away. And I know that's heavy, but it's important. And the kids feel really empowered when they think about it because, you know, the other day on 9/11, we were talking about what happened, and they were so young they hardly know. But I said about 3,000 people died that day, and it was devastating to the country. People were afraid. And we noticed in documents, primary source documents we're looking at yesterday, about 3,000 Cherokee died on the Trail of Tears. And we don't think about it. And I tell them it's this kind of like perfectly imperfect American story because the Cherokee tried really hard to assimilate and fight through the courts, and Andrew Jackson defied the Supreme Court ultimately to execute it. But also, one of the ways they assimilated, and this is before we study the institution of slavery and the story of enslaved people and the legacy of Reconstruction, is the Cherokee had slaves. They had enslaved people who went on the Trail of Tears with them. And then in the early 2000s, they tried to kick them out, the descendants of the freedmen. And the courts this time prevailed, in my mind, in justice and didn't allow that to happen. So it's this incredible sort of case study, I think, of the American experience generally. But also, again, to teach the empowering lessons of history and the people who came before us. We have within those units, I put up here the Voices of Resistance monologue that we'll do later. So it's roughly late 18th, early 19th century monologues of like the freedom fighters and the people who fought back, because there were always lots of them. And so some examples of the students, we give them speeches or primary source documents, and they perform monologues in the class as those people. And last year, I wrote down a few: Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Ida B. Wells, Tecumseh, Black Hawk, Henry Bibb, to name a few. Later, when we look at the Mexican-American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we asked them to really think about, and here we are in that land benefiting, which of course we know was Native people's land before the Ohlonies and whomever else. And then we take that to modern day, or well, to middle 20th century and modern day Chicano civil rights, and they study civil disobedience. They really enjoy especially learning about the blowouts in LA in the 60s. And then at the end of the year, we asked them to end on a positive and find a change in post-World War II American society that's made the American dream possible or more accessible for more people. And I wrote down a few of the topics that they covered last year, which included the Stonewall riots, Black Panthers, the ethnic studies movement in Arizona, the history of the UFW, and a lot more. So again, we tell them all the time in this class, we can't possibly understand modern American society if we don't understand how we got to this particular place in time and the many roads and voices and people who got us here. So, thank you. Oh, and we do really cool field trips. Thank you, Marie, for always saying yes. Berkeley Rep always has a great one on race and class in America. We're hoping to go in October. We go to the Oakland Museum of California. We go see Balmy Alley and the Mission. We go to a lot of places. Cool. Oh, Rosie the Riveter. Always Rosie the Riveter. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin James, and I teach U.S. Government and Economics. I mean, you can look at what we cover on the left-hand side there, and it's pretty hard to have a conversation about U.S. government or about economics without discussing privilege by race, privilege by gender, privilege by social class on a daily basis, because you're talking about the United States. So, for example, one of the things I challenge my students with at the beginning of the year is not simply a binary, is the United States a democracy or not, but to what extent is the United States a democracy, and what does it mean to talk about democracy when simultaneously, or and books tend to be sort of boosterish, and even our book is more boosterish than it needs to be. But what does it mean to talk about democracy when, for example, within the past 10 years, the Supreme Court eviscerated the Voting Rights Act and took pre-clearance in Section 5 out of the Voting Rights Act, meaning that states and localities are free to change their systems of elections without getting pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. And immediately, cities and states, but states all over the country began to pile on with voter identification laws, clearly designed to reduce African-American voter turnout, to reduce turnout among poor people, to reduce turnout among students, clearly. And demonstrably, and in Alabama went a step further, right? And what does it mean to say, okay, you have to go to a particular place to get a card for which you may have to pay $70 or $80 in order to vote? Isn't that a poll tax? Isn't that what the civil rights, wasn't that one of the victories of the civil rights movement by 1963? What does it mean to say we're a democracy when we have kind of rampant gerrymandering? And the Supreme Court has said, well, gerrymandering that explicitly tries to weaken minority representation is unacceptable, but partisan gerrymandering they're not going to look at. They ruled that it was non-justiciable. What does that mean? Because partisan gerrymandering has the practical effect of weakening the votes of Black and Latino people. What does it mean to say we're a democracy when the Supreme Court has basically said that corporations have an unlimited right to spend as much money as they want, rich people have as much right to spend as much money as they want in political campaigns, but labor unions, but the Supreme Court has turned around and in a recent decision made it harder for labor unions to collect union dues. And what economic interests are privileged by those decisions in conjunction. So another thing we talk about a lot is, right, it's U.S. government, so it's your rights under the Constitution. So we talk about things like, for example, we talk about search and seizure. We talk about the right to a jury trial. We talk about the right to counsel, the right to counsel during police questioning. And yet we have a criminal justice system which has waged a war on drugs selectively, with the result that hundreds of thousands of African Americans have been incarcerated for committing drug offenses when African Americans are no more or less likely than white people to commit drug offenses, but they're disproportionately punished for them, and they're disproportionately disenfranchised after their term of servitude, right? So those are the kinds of things we talk about. We also talk about police practices, and of course my students come in constantly with police practice stories, both locally and nationally. In the 2 or 3 years following the Trayvon Martin shooting, following Ferguson, that was a huge portion of the class because that's what the students were walking in with on a daily basis. On economics, we can look at the intersection of privilege by social class and privilege by race. And we can talk about why the United States has one of the highest rates of, has the highest rate of income and wealth inequality of any fully developed industrial nation, advanced industrial society. Why has that happened? And if you read, if you read, as Dr. Trutain urged me to, if you read the New York Times 1619 series of essays, one of them argues it's specifically because, we can argue about whether this is true or not, but it's certainly worth considering the argument. It's because we were built on a foundation of slavery to begin with. Is why we have always tolerated a greater level of income inequality than other countries. Anyway, so those are the kinds of things we play with in government and economics. And it's a great amount of fun, and the students enjoy it.
So I just want to end and say that I am so grateful that there are 12 members in our department that are very thoughtful about what they teach in the classroom and bring to the classroom, and how we've been spending this time trying to really emphasize what are we doing in our core classes that are intertwining these ethnic studies goals and ideas. And also our administration has been very supportive in making sure that we have time during the summer to build on our curriculum and keep having these conversations.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to let every member of the board comment. I don't feel that we get a chance to hear about what's happening in the classroom often enough. And so this has been a great opportunity for us. And I want to thank you again for coming on a work night and spending the time to tell us what you're doing. It's deeply appreciated. Let me go to the board.
Thank you. I'm super excited for my kids to go through this curriculum. I wish my high school education had resembled anything close to this. And as Kim said, I think it is reminding me that we hear very little about actual curriculum and what happens in the classroom. We hear a lot about the sites, so this is really helpful and meaningful for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Student Board Member Mala.
Yeah, just from seeing this presentation, I've realized how much I've learned from being a student in the department, and I really appreciate how much time and thoughtfulness goes into this.
Thank
you. First of all, I would like to commend all of you. You seem very committed and dedicated and are putting in all the hard work it takes, because it sounds like you're doing so much of this independently, well, collaboratively, but at Albany High, and the fact that you have developed ethnic studies, it sounds like pretty much by yourselves, is really outstanding, and you need to be commended for all that. One of the issues that because I go way back to the beginning of the story of ethnic studies. And at that time, or in the last 50 years, I've seen a little bit of an evolution. You know, at the beginning, in the beginning, it was the add-ons and the coloring of the faces in the books and the few references and to important people in history. And I think it has gone a whole lot further down the road, where you are using authentic books by authors that know the true experience, and it's not secondhand information. I guess what I'm really thinking about is the kind of support that you need to actually have the true integration first of the curriculum. And by that I mean, like, ethnic studies should either be, from my perspective, either a mandatory course, or I would like to see ethnic studies really become a part of history, of U.S. history, so that, on the other hand, I could argue, as opposed to a separate class on people of color, that in fact it's day by day integrated into U.S. history courses. And I think the argument about the ethnic studies model curriculum at this time sort of speaks to some of those issues about whether you want something separate or whether you want something truly integrated. And if it's truly integrated, then the things you are addressing needs to be done maybe at the board level in a more thoughtful way too. And I don't know though, as the professionals out there, if there's something that we can do to support you, and if that includes going up to Sacramento and making those standards a lot more focused. For example, like Miriam had said, she adds to what she's given to teach, but how do we make it more integrated and real? And the other, I guess, question or issue I have is, do you have evidence, or how do you know what the students are really taking from your courses in terms of this kind of new perspective or new integration that we're attempting to do? How do you evaluate that? To see if it's just really being in terms of students having in their, a knowledge, a better knowledge for sure of race relations, for example, one, but in addition also emotionally, affectively, how is this impacting on your students going forward as the productive citizens in the United States and interacting, like one of you mentioned, in terms of society?
Yes. So let's see. Going back to the first question, in terms of our department, we actually together sat down and said, what is our goal in terms of drafting the mission statement, and also seeing through that ethnic studies are intertwined into these core classes. As we hired two new teachers to our department, we hired these two individuals knowing that that is our main goal, and they've also been on board in terms of kind of maintaining that goal. So we've been collaborating throughout the last couple of years in terms of aligning our curriculum. I know IHS does a lot to collaborate and align their curriculum, but also in the other core classes, we talk about what are some of the main units that we agree to talk about. So, for example, when I was teaching world history, Miriam and I would actually meet during the summer, and we would actually develop our idea of democratic ideals and the Arab Spring, for example. So we have done a lot to actually collaborate and talk about what are things that we are agreeing to do. At the same time, leaving an option for those who want to individualize a little bit more in their special areas. So that's one of the questions. But
I think that the problem with the board sort of trying to provide resources is that this is not a process that is linear, in the sense that if you had a curriculum that was given to you, you would then be able to realize that it's my best ever teacher of teaching used to say that really teaching is a triangle. It's a relationship between the students and the teacher and the curriculum. And so my heart and my brain has been evolving over a 14-year process in response to the students and the questions they ask me, and the subject matter and the way I study it, and then the way I see that subject matter playing out in their faces, and so in their thinking and their analysis. So I think that all teachers have to be on a journey of examining the weaknesses in their own education, because we all grew up in a curriculum that was whitewashed to the extreme, and then the weakness, and then examining the interests that they have, and then examining the way the students respond. I am working hard to integrate a better analysis of the relationship between Tibet and Mongolia and China, and now trying to figure out how to teach Hong Kong to a group of students who come from all over the place in terms of Chinese political thought. And that is special to my students. They need windows into their own, they need mirrors that reflect back what they've seen. So no book or curriculum will ever make that happen. I have to do that because I have Mongolian students, and I have Tibetan students, and I have Taiwanese students, and I have mainland Chinese students, and I have Hong Kong students. I have to create a curriculum for them, and it's the way it is. So I haven't used the textbook that you give me, and I probably never will, but it sucks. I mean, it doesn't even have the Armenian genocide in it, right? But so you could give me a better textbook, and I suppose that would help. But the main thing that helps is this kind of a relationship where I can get support so that I'm not writing everything myself, and then the opportunity to be with the students and to be with the curriculum over and over and over again and change it every year. So the summer support, a little bit of pay for all the extra hours that we put in, that actually is probably more productive than anything else that we could do. And the way I'm looking at it, the state is coming along in their own slow way, and I don't have time for them. So, but if you feel like taking that up, that's fine. But it doesn't necessarily change what I will do. Yeah.
No. You can come on. I'm gonna talk real quick, and then you just jump right in because I heard Ms. Walden say some things, and I want to make sure that we at a later time address those that she mentioned. So if someone could please follow up, that'd be great. And then real quick, I just wanted to say, and I'm gonna let you guys jump back in. I had an opportunity to sit in one of Ms. Walden's classes, and if you haven't done it, and I mean, I don't want to just invite everybody to your class right now, but if you haven't done it, even if your kids aren't in high school yet, if they're really young and they're going to be there later, I encourage you to just go and sit in her class. And all of the things that she's talking, you can hear the passion in her voice, but all the things that she's talking about, you can see the kids and you can see the subject matter and you can see them being engaged, and it actually makes them want to learn the material versus just things that happen in the past. Everybody needs us to remember this is where this person was sitting, and then 20 years later when you know this is where this person was sitting, and so it's more of I want to learn about people that look like me, and I want to learn about the places that my parents told me where they grew up and things like that. And so anyway, I was just sitting there and I was really into it, and I was like, wow, should I come back? Do I need to do the homework? It was, so I encourage everybody to do that if you haven't already.
I just wanted to respond to a question that Ms. Duran posed, which was, how do we know that we're hitting home? And I can't look into anybody's soul, really. I can try. But I know when we have conversations in class, I know when it's working. And when, last year I taught American history, and I know that you've got a room full of students who can sort of draw comparisons and pretty direct linkages between the attitudes and the immigration policies that brought us the old quota system of the 20s and what's happening right now, or can draw linkages between Japanese American incarceration and things that have happened recently. With Principal Ritchie's support, I'm piloting something in one of my government classes where we're reading all of Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And it's a tiny class. I won't tell you how small because Dr. Wells will take it away. But it's a small class. And I thought, okay, I have lots of questions, and when we go in, we had our first discussion of the first chapter the other day, and I had all these questions I was going to ask to keep everything moving. I didn't have to do anything. They just tore right into it. And they were articulate, and they were smart, and they were perceptive, and they were able to deconstruct arguments and reconstruct them in ways that made sense. And it was fantastic. I didn't really have to do anything.
Thank you. We do have to move on pretty quick here.
I'd like to add one thing before we do move on about what, Clementina, you had said about how do we support the social studies department. I'm obviously not a teacher of the social studies department. I don't know what that experience is, but I do know what the experience of a student going through every single one of the classes that was talked about today. I went through IHS, I went through world history, AP comparative government, I did US history, now I'm in US government and economics, and I'm also in ethnic studies, so I have the experience of being a student in those classes, and I think that what I have found to be one of the biggest factors is the size of my class. My U.S. Government and Economics class is very small, and it is wonderful. I think that in social studies, it's so important to have smaller classes, at least for my version of learning. But I know that that sentiment has been vocalized by other students as well. And so obviously that's something that's much easier said than done, and that's something that we have been struggling with for a very long time, but making that a priority is something that would really support students. And so when we're thinking about how do we support the social studies department as a student, that is what really comes across as helpful, is smaller class sizes, because then we have the opportunity to have more conversation, to ask our teachers very, very individual kind of tailored questions, and we can get much more feedback and a much better quality of a response because they actually have the time to give that response. So that's something that I wanted to add before we close that. And then finally, like I said, I've gone through all of these classes, and some of these things that you guys were presenting on, I didn't have those when I was, in IHS, when I was in world history. And so I can clearly see that you guys are like, change is happening, and that's really exciting for me to see, because I know that my little sister is going to be coming to the school, and you guys are constantly working to make your curriculum better. And I don't know of any other, I don't know of schools that change their curriculum so quickly to match the needs of the students, and I just think that's really cool, and I'm excited for my sister to be going through the AHS Social Studies department, and I'm excited for future grades to be going through that as well. So, thanks.
Okay, I got to do couple little things. One, California is working on their ethnic studies curriculum, their model curriculum. And they have asked for feedback sessions with ethnic study teachers and interested parties. And they've also talked about holding listening sessions across the state. And I think you guys are fantastic. And I've been inspired by hearing this. And so let us know if you're interested, board members, or if other people are interested in possibly being a part of that, because I'm going to ask Dr. Wells if he can put forward some names to State Superintendent of Schools Tony Thurmond to see if we can get some people into those sessions. And we've got a great thing going here, and I would like to see all students in California have a chance to learn real history and get their eyes wide open too. So please just send an email or let us know if you're interested in that. And I would like to say, with utmost sincerity, thank you for your work. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Can we get a copy of that PowerPoint?
Board has requested a copy of that PowerPoint.
I have to ask, can I get a copy? Yeah. Michelle, is it possible to get a copy of that PowerPoint?
Yeah. Okay, and that moves us to item 7, approval of consent calendar. I think there might be the item of the board committee assignments that we might want to discuss.
Do we need to just pull it and then approve the consent calendar first?
I think the way to do it is to discuss it separately and then vote on the consent calendar as a whole after we have made. Yeah.
So I can't open the consent calendar on here, so I'm going to, from memory, the item I wanted to pull was Board of Education Annual Committee and School Assignments. So I wasn't here at the meeting on September 10th when it became clear there was a need for another board member to be on the system. I'm not going to get it right.
Sustainability and Integrated Design Committee?
Yes.
Oh, great.
So I would be happy to be the second committee member on that, assuming that, and unless anybody else has changed their mind.
You're the first volunteer.
Okay.
Okay. So with that change, are there any other changes to consent items? Let me see. I don't see any other changes to consent items. So if we could move the consent calendar with that change, I think we can get all of those items taken care of.
Okay.
So moved?
Yes. I move we approve the consent calendar without item 2. Is
A second.
that what you meant?
With the change in item on the committee assignment
We can
item.
approve it still as part of the consent calendar.
I think we can. I'm taking a step here, but I think we can do that.
With the change on item 2, adding me as the second board member on that committee. I move that we approve the consent calendar.
I, again, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And that moves us a long way down to our superintendent and board member reports. Dr. Wells, would you like to report?
Yes, I have a number of items that I wanted to discuss tonight, and one that was in the paper is just locally about our 6 Albany students who were named as semifinalists for the 2020 National Merit Scholarship Award, something we should really, really be proud of. And so we're going to follow their progress and hopefully have some good news for you in February. This is such a high honor of academic excellence recognized by the country that something as a community we should be really applauding and proud of. And the names of the students are listed, and it's public information because it was listed in the newspaper. That's one. My next item, number 2, superintendent goes. I just want the community and the district to know some of the work that's going on around the district, one of which is we're articulating our goals. Right now, they're focus areas, and we're going to have objectives for each one of those goals coming forward, and it would be transparent and public so folks would know what the superintendent focus areas and goals and objectives are for the year. But right now, the 5 focus areas are student achievement, whole child, communication, construction, and fiscal stability. And we just put that out in a spirit of transparency. The next one, number 3, for my report, is the Albany Education Foundation is just an amazing foundation, and I won't spend any time talking about that. But I had an opportunity to meet with a group of new teachers here in Albany, and we had dinner at my new favorite place called Little Star, and just sitting next to these new teachers, and some are veterans because we were able to take them from other districts, and to hear their excitement and enthusiasm about the Albany way and the opportunity to teach in this wonderful community was just reinvigorating. Item number 4, kindergarten at Marin. As you know, and the community knows, we had an unfortunate incident with one of our kindergartner twins at the kindergarten level where he was in need of support, of bone marrow. And we had the community come out about 100 to support this young kid. But the work didn't happen by no sacrifice. We had a community person who led these efforts, and you guys probably know her all too well, but she is now my new shero. She put all this together, getting the publicity out there and have a number of other events coming together. And I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to one of our community leaders, Spice Doss, because that was just amazing and a tear-jerking experience to watch her rally the community and have them come together to do what's best for a child. It was just a moving an experience, and I just tip my hat off to her tonight and like to say thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was at the Marin International Potluck and did my best to drum up a few donor candidates there and saw other board members also at that event. I am not going to say much, but I did want to make the comment that the calendar task force that the board convened has met twice, once at 4 o'clock right before this meeting, and they are working hard to analyze all of the survey data and look at attendance data in detail to try to come up with the 3 draft calendars that we requested. So that is in progress. Move on.
I just wanted to talk about one thing. There were the events happening at Marin, as Dr. Wells mentioned. He stole my shout out, but that's fine. But I think that it's great that the community, was able to come together. I hope that people will still, continue to participate. The family is still in need. They're continuing to fight. We're continuing to fight with them. I did want to acknowledge one of the teachers at Marin, Camille Snyder, was just in line like everybody else, waiting her turn to do her part, and she noticed that the line was long and she saw that she could help, so she jumped into action. She got there a little after 12 when the event started, and she was there until after 3:30, well after the event was over, helping people sign up that weren't weren't able to use the computers as well. She was able to jump in there and really help, and I think it's important to acknowledge her as well, because teachers have that tough job Monday through Friday, but as she showed us, it's not a Monday through Friday job. Teachers are always on, and whenever they see an opportunity to make life better for somebody, they jump right on it, and we're really lucky to have teachers like that here.
Yeah, just 2 things. Last week, I went to the Albany Middle School back to school night for my son. He's a 7th grader. It was great to see all the teachers. The presentations were real quick. I'm used to this whole long one, so it was bouncing from one room to the next to actually get an idea as well. As you don't have time to talk or you're going to be late to your next class. I was late to some of the presentations, but it was really well run. All the teachers did a great job. And also before that, I stopped at the PTA meeting that they had in the library. I think Kim and Clementina might have been there as well. Huge outpouring of people, and those are the groups that make our schools so successful, and I wanted to thank all the PTA and the parents who were there. And the second one, I also just wanted to give Dr. Wells some props. I got a couple emails, and every now and then I kind of cruise around on Facebook, and a couple of people wanted to thank him for moving so quickly on dealing with the air conditioning situation at Cornell. So thank you, Mr. Wells, or Dr. Wells.
I'll be quick. I was also at the annex, and for those people who don't know, the 8th grade English and history classes are being held in the annex. So for those of us with 8th graders, we got to see what it's like to have these amazing new classrooms, and it's amazing. And the teachers talked about how amazing it was to be able to teach in those facilities. So it was exciting to see that all come to fruition in the very brief amount of time they have to tell us anything, which is still more than at least I hear from my own 8th grader. So it's great to be in that space.
I wanted to mention like 3 things. The first is there was a ribbon ceremony for AMS, the Success Room, yesterday. And so there was a couple pictures taken. Hopefully mine's not there because I'm always late, but Julie was able to, we got a couple of pictures. There's the principal actually doing the ribbon cutting, and then there's me, just to tell you, prove to you I was there. No, and everybody else, of course. It was very exciting, kind of emotional, and so it's great, and we are definitely going to be hearing more about what's going on there and information about the kids that they're serving there, so pretty exciting. Brian and I also went, unfortunately Sarah was sick, but Brian and I went to CSBA, the California School Board Association Conference in Santa Rosa for 2 days, Friday and Saturday. And you'll be happy to hear that I learned a few things, like stepping back and getting the big picture, instead of doing the minutia stuff that I like to do, but really very thoughtful stuff about the bigger picture and the vision that should come from the board. Given that, one of the things that I had mentioned prior, and luckily they had the research to back it up, was in terms of a potential thing that we as a board could do is really focus more on our reports on student learning and achievement. A highly effective board is 65% of their agenda is on student achievement, learning and achievement, and the average board tends to just give it like 11%. So that's kind of an eye-opener and something that, hopefully we as a board can agree to or move on, et cetera. And their finance and facilities, and we know well, we're more in the 60%, or it feels like it in this last several months, and ideally it's supposed to only be 10% of a board meeting. And this is based on research that they have done. And then community relations and advocacy is at least 15%. I wish we could do more, or maybe we can strive for extra time at board meetings. Jacob? Maybe not. Okay. So anyway, there's that. And with respect to this, I sort of going back to trying to encourage us as a board to come up with some goals for ourselves for this year. Just like we've been working with the superintendent kind of furiously on his goals, I would actually like to see us have a goal or two for this school year. And it could be as easy as working on something like this. I had written down a bunch of different ones, like are we working effectively as one unit? That might be harder to show, but, are we working as one voice as opposed to 5 individuals, but more as one voice? And maybe we could have study sessions around that as part of that evaluation. And community relationships, having town halls maybe a couple times a year. And then I always like the one about helping the superintendent to be successful. Because if he's successful, the idea is the children will be successful, the community will be happy, and we will be very happy. So, and then the very last thing I wanted to mention is that I met with Peggy McQuaid. She's the vice mayor here in Albany, but she was not, this was not her role as the vice mayor, but rather as an individual in the community. She last year participated, I guess, on some small committee that had pulled together to address United Against Hate Week, which is coming up in November. And so the city has a resolution around it. And I was hoping that, I've talked to Dr. Wells about that, if we as a board would be interested in having a resolution around United Against Hate Week, and then also asking the schools to participate in some way. It would be something that they would come up with, but just to show our support for that. So that's it.
We hear you, and I think that we can work on scheduling the work studies that you described on working effectively together as a board governance team. And I think we can get, we passed a resolution last year for United Against Hate, and I think that we can find that and update it and bring it to the board again and pass it along to our schools also. Okay. Student board members, are you ready to report?
Thank you. So at Marin Elementary on Thursday, October 10th at 6:30, there will be a parent education workshop exploring the dynamic world of gender. And presenter Olivia Higgins will lead the workshop for reflection, questions, and sharing. She's going to address the most frequently asked questions and concerns about gender. And then also at Marin, the fundraiser Chalk It Up will be held on October 5th, which is a Saturday. So come out to support Marin and create art that will last throughout the year if rain lets it. And then at Cornell and Ocean View, the individual PTAs had an ice cream social this past week. And then, let's see. not connected to the elementary schools, but they're publicizing it throughout the elementary schools. The Familias Latinas de Albany will be at Music in the Park for the last Music in the Park tomorrow at Memorial. And then they're featuring La Misa Negra's heavyweight cumbia and high-energy Afro-Latin music tomorrow.
At Albany Middle School, 6th grade potlucks will be going on from September 23rd, yesterday, through the 26th. And many middle schoolers joined students in San Francisco for the climate strikes on September 20th, along with the high schoolers in our district. At Albany High School, the author Gabby Rivera came to speak at AHS on September 15th. Many students, including those in Earth Team, EdSet, and Speak, as well as other high school student groups, left school on Friday to strike in the September 20th climate strikes. Students attended a college readiness session this past Wednesday, September 18th, and there will be continuing college readiness sessions in the coming weeks as well. And then finally, we're in Start With Hello Week right now, so students are currently participating in Start With Hello Week, where different days entail different activities. These could be saying hello to 5 people. This could be getting lunch with someone new. The effort is to stop social isolation within high schools, as well as other schools. And it was started by the parents of the Sandy Hook Elementary School. After the shooting, they decided that they needed to do something about social isolation, and they decided to create Start With Hello Week. So we are currently doing that in our high school. On Monday, we all got name tags in order to say hello to someone new. I believe tomorrow it's get lunch with someone new. So it's kind of a fun way to mix up our high school social scene a little bit. And I've been having fun with it. I think a lot of other schools are as well. And then finally, for the policy ideas section of this, this school board report, obviously, a lot of high schoolers and middle schoolers left school on Friday because they believe protesting for a future was more important than being educated for a future they may not have. In light of this event and sacrifice by the students of our district, I would like to propose we have a review and discussion item about ways to be more sustainable in our district, and invite the Earth Team from the high school, as well as the Climate Action Committee, and teachers or community members, I know there's a lot of them who are interested in this issue, to be able to speak about ways that we could create a more sustainable district. I know that Earth Team has a lot of really wonderful ideas, and I've been looking for a way to implement some of those. So I think that this could be a really great way to, one, engage high school students more that aren't just me and Audrey, but two, actually get some really great ideas for how to be a little bit more sustainable. Clearly, students in our district really care about this. I was there, I left school because I think that it was more important to be at that strike and show the world that this is something that we are going to be seriously facing. So I think that a really great way to show the students in our district that we care and that we stand in solidarity with them is by having some type of review and discussion, and hopefully some review and action that would come from that forum.
In addition to that, I also wanted to share that Michaela and I have been in discussion with Ms. Surowitz, who's here right now, because her students are doing in their IHS classes a research project about the school start time at AHS, which we have or are working towards this year. So we're meeting on Monday to possibly have a space for students to speak their opinions about that. And we're also going to create a poll for them to share what times they would like. So we look forward to bringing you those ideas that the students have.
I look forward to hearing those. I'm sure the whole board does. Trustee Duran.
I just wanted to ask, is it appropriate to make a second for our student board member Michaela's request to have this, to have an agenda item of the Earth Team come to the board?
I could propose it during the end of the meeting, where we're going to be proposing agenda items. I don't know if it's allowed to happen right now, but I could do it then as well.
I think that maybe the place to start would be the end of the meeting, and I also think that maybe the place to start would be a spotlight to bring the students in. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and with that, Thanks, everybody. That was very informative updates from all. I would like to ask if we have any people here that would like to address the board on matters not on the agenda. Please note that board practice limits each speaker to no more than 3 minutes, and the Brown Act limits the board's ability to discuss or act on items which are not on the agenda. Therefore, we can refer the items to staff. We could only maybe give a request for a clarification or something like that in response. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Nair Castillo McIntyre. I'm the father of India McIntyre, a student in the special day class in 2nd grade at Cornell Elementary. And this is kind of on the agenda, kind of not on the agenda. But on the approval of the consent calendar, I noticed that you have the Board of Education Annual Committee and school assignments for the coming year. And today, when you're going to have a presentation about special education, it occurred to me that there is one very special issue that takes a significant amount of your budget, and you would think that if anything, because of that, it should be important to the board. But there is not a committee on special education, one that includes 2 board members to sit on it. I know we were talking, Trustee Clark and I, about how really overworked all of you are, but that's part of the deal, of course. So I would like to suggest that as you listen to Ms. Michael's presentation on special education, that you also consider the possibility of creating, and more importantly, being a part of a committee on special education so that all students in an inclusive Albany Unified School District, including the students in special education, can receive the benefit of the mission of, as you have stated it in the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Eddy. Just want to first welcome Dr. Wells and thank you all again for all the decisions, the hard decisions you've had to make over the last few months and will continue to work on. I am here to bring up again the issue of PE waivers at the high school. The high school currently allows allows students to waive PE if they participate in a school sport. However, many students aren't able to make those teams or already participate in sports that the district doesn't have. And so we would like to see this policy updated to be more in line with some of the other districts in our area where there is some sort of supervised waiver, working with the coach and the PE teachers in order to account for the time that the students are spending outside. For example, both of our children are spending 12 to 16 hours a week doing gymnastics, far more time than is required at the high school for PE. And we have nothing against PE. We're obviously think it's very important, but that if a student is demonstrating that they're doing some exercise and training outside of the school, that there should be an opportunity to waive the PE requirement beyond the freshman year. I know it's been at least brought up to be possibly considered for an agenda last year, and I know you guys got a lot on your plate, but I'd just like to bring it up again, hoping that we can still address that this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Clark.
Yeah, so I know I can't address the speaker, but I can't thank him, right, for coming up and speaking. Thank you very much. I can't address staff, and I remember this conversation happening a year ago. My son plays football in Berkeley, and I said that I saw it on the telephone pole where they were doing rowing and getting credit for certain things. He did ask for this a year ago, at least one time. Someone up here on the board, me, asked for it to come back, and it never came back, and that's my bad for not following through. But we can't go back and change the past, but I'm asking again that this comes back as soon as possible because the speaker has been very patient, and I appreciate him coming back and asking again, and sorry for it not happening before.
Thank you, Trustee Clark.
Hi, I'm Tamara Keller, and I have a quick one about the calendar, academic calendar for 2020 to 2021, so next year. Recently, my extended family is talking about plans for the summer, which is crazy early, but I was wondering, what is our first day of school next year? And the current website, or the school website, still has last year's calendar and this year's calendar, but not next year's. So I'm just wondering where that is in the process, and if it has been formally approved or not, and if not, when might that happen? And if it is, can we get it up on the website so that everybody can know about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. The board did approve that calendar, and it needs to be posted to the website. I'll refer that to staff. Thank you.
President Trittain, I just wanted to ask a question. Is there a way, I mean, it seems that this is an unnecessary but nice visit tonight, but from a parent, but really, shouldn't those things be, well, first of all, could she just call the district? And, I mean, do parents know who to call in order to answer a question like that without having to come down here at 9 o'clock at night?
Well, I will say that Tamara attends virtually all of our board meetings because she prepares if you remember a few years ago, the board members were writing a summary of the board meeting themselves, and we were posting that to various school newsletters and e-trees and things like that. And it was just too much, and couldn't keep up with it. And Tamara has kind of taken that on personally. And if you're not on her email list for getting the board meeting summaries, you should certainly make that happen because they're fantastic. So with that, back to you, Tamara.
Yeah. So I'll say I just took this opportunity since I am here just to put that up. But I did speak with one of the secretaries at Marin School when I happened to be in there. And she said, oh, let me get you that. And then I got replied back that, oh, it hasn't been approved yet. So that's why I was like, oh, because I thought I remembered that it had been approved last year, but I couldn't find it in the new system for the agenda. Granicus or whatever it is way better than what we had before, so it'll be a lot easier going forward, but I couldn't dig it out from before. But yes, if anybody out there is watching this video and wants to be on my informal list of the reports for of school board, you can send me an email, and I have a really complicated email address, so I apologize. I'm going to spell it out. It's my first name, which is Tamara, Tamara, at Bullamanka, B as in boy, ULLAMANKA.com. So Tamara at Bullamanka.com, and I'll add you to my distribution list. Thanks.
Thank you. And that would bring us to item 11, staff reports. And we're looking forward to hearing from Shelley Ball tonight on secondary mental health program update. I'm sorry. Shelley, would you mind pausing for just like a couple of minutes?
Not at all.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a 2-minute break here. I will say that board members have been here for a work study session before the regular meeting started, so this is our second meeting, and for some of us, it's our third consecutive meeting today. So a little bit of a break here.
Just thought, as a parent, as you know, any parent, would all parents have a coach? It's crazy. I mean, it's so important. Is there anybody there to do it? Who does it?
What is the school calendar next year?
Oh my God, I was doing this thing.
And next year is the first year that we're well off from home district.
It's important to hear. That's
I'll do that. Thank you.
Take two and pass it down.
Straight up, remember to come up there, here we go.
Yo, yeah, I remember.
Okay, we are reconvening, folks. And this is our item 11-1, our first staff report tonight on secondary mental health program update for 2018-19. So these are statistics that were collected last year.
Right, right. So thank you so much for having me back again. I think I was in December or January of last year. And I've been able to collect the data from the secondary school programs. Just to start again, for those of you who are new, in November 2005, the taxpayers of Albany passed a parcel tax. This was, I believe the impetus for the parcel tax was 2 or 3 completed suicides in the year or 2 before that. And so the community was, you know, appropriately grieving and wondering what they might do to address this. So I was hired just for the high school with Berkeley Mental Health covering the middle school, McGregor, and I believe maybe the elementary schools at that time. So, and I recognized I had come over from Berkeley Health, where they have a very robust health center that includes medical and health education and mental health, that I could substantially increase the services we would provide if I created more of a program rather than just seeing kids myself frantically. A few years later, the program that I developed and that Sally Cohen later joined me for, and she wishes she could be here tonight, but she had a prior engagement, provides crisis, brief, and long-term treatment to Albany's most vulnerable students. The program is intern-driven, so that most of and about 1/3 of the students we see work with interns for longer term. The interns tend to provide those services, with Sally and I providing more of the crisis or referral or brief treatment or case management services to students. So again, we provide brief and long-term therapy, as I said, case management. We've got individual and group treatment. We consult regularly with outside providers, including therapists and pediatricians and psychiatrists. We meet with parents regularly. We refer outside. I always say anyone I can refer outside, I'm going to, because we tend to have a waiting list, usually by mid-year. And then we have helped out in various years with district-wide crises. This program shows some of the places that we recruit our interns from. They come from, you know, top schools in the Bay Area, as well as in the country. We're pleased to have social work students as well as MFT and sometimes psychology students. The MFT interns are a particular treat at times because sometimes they've already finished their graduate work, so they're not doing an internship for their graduate education. They're postmasters. They may even have a private practice started on the outside, so they come with a little bit more experience.
Excuse me, can you define the MFT acronym for
So the
all of
MFT
us?
is the Marriage and Family Therapy.
Thank you.
Trainees and associates, yeah. And then the social work and occasionally a psychology student. So in 2009, Superintendent Marla Stevenson asked me to extend our services into the middle school in McGregor. The district wanted to stop the contract with Albany Berkeley Mental Health. At the time, we did this with no increase in funding. So you can imagine just sort of like expanding like that was difficult. And over the next few years, we were able to get a little bit more funding. As our program expanded in numbers, we were allotted 0.2 FTE more around 2015 to this scenario that you see above. So I reduced my time at Albany High. Sally added on the McGregor, and I was covering the middle school and Albany High at 0.8, and eventually we were able to get a full-time, a day-a-week equivalent for the middle school, a day-a-week equivalent for McGregor, and 0.8 for Albany High School. We also have a trauma grant from the city of Berkeley that provides quarter-time FTE. Last year, Dr. Ian Fairstein ran our groups, and this year we were lucky to have Sally Cohen back. She has done, I think it's an 8-year, we've had the grant for 8 years. She will have done it at this point 7 out of the 8 years. So Just the quick numbers. By using interns, Sally and I are able to take the district's 1.2 FTE that they pay for our positions to leverage about 5.0 full-time equivalent positions with 6 to 7 interns per year who each work about 3 days per week. So there's sort of this lovely quintupling of money happening. So our goal is to serve students who don't have access to other treatment, most of whom are dealing with issues like those listed here. We work closely with parents. We work with outside therapists and psychologists. You know, I'm a social worker by training, so I just believe in the village model. I can't even imagine being a private practice therapist who didn't have the kind of access that we get to the teachers, to the administrators. It's lovely to be able to go into a teacher, for example, and say, can we just reduce this kid's homework for 2 weeks? They can catch up on their sleep, and then instead of their homework taking them 5 hours a night, once they're returned to 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, they might be able to do the homework in the 2 or 3 hours it should be taking them. And so just being able to work as a team is really one of my favorite parts of the job. Here are numbers for last year. You can see 302 students served. I can't believe how many students walk through our doors these are individual student appointments. And we had 65, parent and caregiver appointments as well last year. That doesn't even include the 527 number. We fold into that phone calls with parents, which might be up to an hour long, but we really wanted to differentiate kind of office visits from other contacts. Those 527 also might include collateral conversations with counselors, teachers, outside providers. We do an awful lot of suicide assessments, and I try to make sure when I ask the intern, talking about suicide and suicidal ideation is a fairly common thing that one would do if someone was seeing a student who was feeling depressed. It's not a topic we shy away from asking about, but these 30 suicide assessments are not in that routine way that we might ask someone. So these, in order for it to be counted in these numbers, there's a real threat. We've often heard about it from a community member or a parent, a friend, or the student is telling us that they're really grappling with the issue of whether or not to kill themselves. So this resulted last year in 6 hospitalizations from the 3 sites, McGregor, the high school, and the middle school. We also often are helping parents, I just want to say on that topic, hospitalize or bring their own children in for assessment. They may have their kids at home and they call in saying, what should I do? So, and those phone calls where we say, bring them to Children's Hospital right away or bring them to Kaiser right away, often result in hospitalizations as well. So just the 3 pieces. One, I was just reminded with the social studies teachers here. So another hat I wore when I first came in 2006 was to start the Identity, Health, and Society program. So I actually created the curriculum outline. The teachers really did, obviously, the bulk of the nitty-gritty work. And then I acted as department chair. It was its own department for a few years until I was very grateful to fold it into an existing department so I could focus more on the clinical work. But I just want to say the Identity, Health, and Society class has been really amazing in terms of freshmen hearing about something, they're processing it in their IHS class, they're coming down, they're sharing with an adult because they learned in class that they need to do this. So I really see our program and the IHS program as working very much hand in hand. That said, let me speak really quickly because some of you may wonder, this is the City of Berkeley's trauma grant. And our interns have questions about this every year, and you can certainly ask me questions too. It's designed to be race-based support groups, 3 three groups, one for African American students, and Black students, one for Latinx students, and one for Asian students. And you can imagine that causes all sorts of interesting dynamics. There might be a student from India or a Middle Eastern student, and we figure out how to fold those students in as well. But those are the parameters of the grant. It's not something we've designed. It's quite a lovely thing because it reaches out to underrepresented youth of color in our schools, and it allows them to. I'm trying to think of the name of to have a group where there's a very common experience, an affinity group of sorts. That's also a support group. The goals of the group, which are met each year, include increasing connectedness to school. Decreased days absent to school. There are some students who say they mainly come in that day because they don't miss that day because the group is happening. Decreased substance use, increased healthy coping strategies. And then, of course, a lot of just sense of community among the students in the group. And then I also wanted to just highlight peer helping because it's another part of my job, 3 hours a week plus any other late night work I do. I spend training 22 peer helpers each year. There's also a leadership group that meets on another day of the week. Peer helpers meet during advisory. Once you're in, you're in. So we have folks, typically they start their sophomore year, they apply to get in, and then they continue teaching and learning for the 3 remaining years they have. They become pretty expert in a lot of topics, and we have always done these 2 presentations for the 14 years that I've been doing it so far. Suicide and depression prevention, including how to help a friend or oneself. These are presentations to the IHS classes. We get a slew of students after that presentation coming into the mental health offices. And then a sexual decision-making presentation, including consent, abstinence, pregnancy, and then sexually transmitted infection prevention. This year, the students really want to, in different years, they've done different other projects as well. There have been years where we've presented on cyber safety to the middle schoolers. There have been years where we've done body positive or other kinds of consent campaigns, not just consent around sexual health, but consent around drug use and peer pressure and things like that. This year, the peer helpers really want to work on a substance use and abuse presentation. So we're fast and furiously trying to figure out how to do that, who the audience should be, and largely we ask them as the experts, who does it make sense to present to? Obviously, we could do it everywhere all the time, but if we could develop a presentation for one grade right now, which would it be? What would the themes be? So we're working on that right now. And that's what I've got. Any questions for me? I don't know if there's time. Yeah.
And I don't know if you can answer it right now, but I'm just curious, for the students where you kind of make the determination to send them for outside services, what is the, I guess, like, how do you stay in contact with that student or keep up with kind of how they're doing or whatnot? What's the mode for feedback, I guess?
How do you keep that? Yeah, so often, if I'm referring someone out, I've been in touch with their parents, right? And so often that parent will stay in touch with me. The counselors also fold it in. So for any referral that's made, the counselors, they may not know the content exactly of what's going on in the in the sort of therapeutic or clinical session, but they have a general idea of what's happening. They're calling the student, and the team continues to envelop the student as much as we can. Students who have been with us, and then I get a chance to refer them out, they know that they can come back and see us. We have a lot of students at the high school. I don't think this happens as much at the middle school, but at the high school who drop in. They come during a break. They email me, can I see someone in the next few days? So there's certainly that capacity to keep tabs on them. So we might, if we've been seeing them 3 times and then referring them out, we might arrange with them to check in with them again in a month. That's a pretty common thing. And then the counselor will bring back their name to us. Have you noticed that this is going on? And sometimes we find out that the outside therapy didn't continue. So we're sort of always available to parents, students, counselors, administrators, and that's why I love working in a school, to be honest. I don't know how I would achieve that working outside of a school. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a few comments, and I know we're running short on time. But I just wanted to say the culture at Albany High School is inherently stressful, and we have very high academic achievement, but that also means high stress and high pressure. And I know many students that skip classes because they go to the library and they do their work. And as we go through budget cuts and stuff like that, I think we should really put a focus on not taking away from the mental health department, but reinforcing it and making it stronger. And that's not just direct contact, but as Ms. Ball was saying, she started the IHS program and she does peer help. And I think halfway through the year you said there's a waiting list, which that's if you need help and you're not able to get it. I think we can definitely improve that and focus on that for this year.
Thank you, Student Board Member Mala. I'm going to ask Dr. Wells if he would like to comment on that.
I'm assuming commenting on Audrey's comment about, I think a school board student member Audrey makes an excellent point. And I just want to illuminate that point because it's not about what we say, it's about what we do that's reflected in our budget that really tells us what our priorities are really about. And so if our kids' well-being, which is my goal number 2, the whole child, we have to have Tier 3-like services, and we're talking about mental health. So the long and short of that, when it comes to what's important, what's a priority, this is one of our priorities for our district because this is a health and safety issue which supersedes everything else. So when you ask me my thoughts and my response, there it is.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you just one quick question because you say there's always lots of questions about the race-based support group. And I didn't quite understand. It says here reaches out to underrepresented youth of color. What does the underrepresented mean? I didn't.
You know, Sally wrote that slide, so I'm going to take a guess. Underrepresented in the school and probably within, although certainly not Asian students, but underrepresented also in mental health services.
Meaning students of color aren't knocking on your doors as much as you think?
You know, because, no. So actually, I think we do a better job than many programs serving underrepresented. Again, this is a City of Berkeley grant, and I don't know if it's larger. I don't work with the grant. Joanne Weil does, so you might call her in for that. So I don't know if the money is county-wide, or I know the City of Berkeley administers it. But these are groups who might have a harder time accessing services, not necessarily in Albany. And in fact, I do have numbers. I can get them to one of you around how we are serving each of the groups compared to their numbers in Albany. But I think the idea in the grant is populations that are underrepresented in mental health care.
See, and just a question about what Audrey had mentioned, which is, do you see going forward the need to expand from the kids, I guess these would be our Tier 3 kids, but to exactly what she had mentioned, which is all students, and the fact that the stressors, as you well know, that are out there for all students, and how are we going to
to respond, right?
That support for them as well.
Right, right. And you know, it's so interesting in this day and age because even if you have Kaiser, even if you have health insurance, you don't necessarily, I have parents who've called every provider within 15 miles of their approved provider list of mental health providers. Having insurance doesn't even ensure that you can find a mental health provider. At Kaiser, even the most severely depressed kids don't tend to get more than maybe a once a month appointment. So what, you know, our kids are in need. I would say, I mean, the difficulty with expanding much farther than what we've done so far is twofold. One is space. So we've got 5 or 6 rooms at the 3 sites filled every day. And the other would be, you know, we are supervising as fast and furiously as we can, but without a lot more, you know, supervisor money, it might be difficult to increase the number of interns. And I am somewhat, you know, I also wear a public health hat. I have a public health degree and a social work degree. And although I'd love to increase the mental health program at Albany High, I think that would be wonderful. It would take a lot of resources. I also am a big believer in the kinds of policy level changes that a district can make that has a huge impact on mental health. And many of those are free and some of those are costly. So I've always been involved with the Bell Start Change campaign. I'll call it a campaign. It's been going on for about, 13 of my 14 years. Certainly moving the calendar. I would say schools are looking at things like cell phone use during the day and the increases in anxiety and depression that I feel strongly are associated with that, and how to move with this culture that's embracing this technology, or how to figure, I think there are new solutions we haven't even begun to explore. And so I'm also a believer in sort of those kind of macro level changes and policy changes that we can be thinking about as a district. And certainly, if there's more money, I'd be happy to expand our program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Shelley and I were talking at one of the meetings that we both attend. I think it was maybe the calendar task force, and she mentioned that the mental health department used to report annually to the board, and then it just sort of fell by the wayside, and it wasn't happening. And then she and Shelley developed a presentation and came to us in January when we were making budget decisions. And then we asked her to come back now because in last January they had numbers from the previous year. And so we asked her to come back. So now we have 2 years of numbers that have been presented to us. But I would like the board to consider annualizing this report and making sure that we hear our mental health statistics every September. I'll bring that back up when we get to matters to agendize. And that brings us to 11-2, our special education report.
Good evening, members of the Board of Education and community members. I'm Veronica Michael. I'm the Director of Student Services and Special Education for Albany Unified School District. And what I have for you this evening is a pretty comprehensive overview of our special ed program within the district. The genesis was a list of questions that I believe board members submitted, and then I did the research to find the answers for those. And so it's a lot of information, and so if we could maybe hold questions to the end. I did go through the Q&A and answered some of the questions that were submitted, so hopefully that provided more clarity. So without any further ado, first of all, I just want to give you an overview of what our community, who we share resources with. We belong to what's called the North Region Special Education Local Plan Agency, which is commonly known as the SELPA. which is made up of 5 school districts that are near us. Special education eligible students are guaranteed the least restrictive environment within a free and appropriate public education. So oftentimes you'll hear LRE and FAPE, and that's what those 2 acronyms stand for. And the goal of special education is to provide educational support through an individualized education plan, which is also an acronym IEP, to students who may qualify under 14 different qualifying conditions. And the 14 qualifying conditions range from developmental delay, which would be 0 to 3-year-olds, to something that's most common in schools, a specific learning disability, and then the ensuing list. So there's different categories of disabilities. Some are considered low incidence, such as deaf and blindness, because those happen less commonly than some of the other disabilities. I did include in the slideshow, there was a question about what the questions were that the board submitted for my research. And so throughout the rest of this presentation, these questions will be answered in some form or another. So I'm not going to read them to you, but you have them with you. Previously, I mentioned the North Region SELPA. And this slide shows you which 5 districts are included in our SELPA. And the member LEAs, or local education agencies, i.e. school districts, are Alameda, Albany, Berkeley, Emeryville, and Piedmont. And in the second column, you can see the total enrollment for each of those districts. And then in the next column, you can see the special ed count for those particular districts. The last column is the percentage of general ed that special ed students make up of the district. In other words, 1,203 out of 9,686 is 12.42%, et cetera. So it just gives you an idea of the size of the districts in our SELPA, the enrollment, and the number of students who are qualified under special ed in those different districts. To go more specifically within our district, I broke out the numbers of students who were either special day students or resource students. So the first group of students are our special day students. They're more impacted with their disabilities and need more support. So their program is going to be a lot more intense and more specialized. So we have special day students in preschool throughout adult transition, which would be age 22, of which there are 61 of those students. Within those 61, 12 have intensive individual supports, otherwise known as a one-to-one para. The next category of students would be your students that have less impactful disabilities, which would be our resource students. They would range from specialized academic instruction to perhaps speech and language disabilities. And so the breakdown is right now at this point, well, actually as of the 16th, which is a week ago when I pulled the numbers, Marin has 26 RSP students, Ocean View has 25, Cornell has 24, Albany Middle School has 56, and Albany High School has 59. And then in addition to those students, we have 82 that are speech and language only students who they get services because their single disability is a speech or language impairment. The next couple of slides give you an idea of what classes are located at which locations and how many paraeducators those particular classes utilize. So you can see that ACC, it's a preschool special day class with 4 paraeducators, for example. And then we can just go down the list. Cornell special day class has 4 paraeducators. The Cornell inclusion program has 3 paraeducators, and so on and so forth. So depending on the student's needs, sort of predicates how many paraeducators, and the IEPs also dictate how much paraeducator support is provided at each classroom. The next slide is just a continuation of our sites as we age up through middle school, high school, and then the adult transition class. This next slide is very interesting. It has to do with the continuum of services that is provided within our SELPA. So within those 5 districts that we have a consortium with, these are the programs that can be found throughout the SELPA. What I've done is I've bolded the programs that we provide in Albany. So you can see there's, I believe, a list of 11 different types of programs, and of those 11 programs in Albany, we provide general ed with accommodations, SAI push-in, which is specialized academic instruction, or pull-out. So this would be your resource class. Inclusion is a support program for students that are a bit more impacted, and it provides more mainstream experiences for students. And then the next bolded one is the moderate, mild to moderate special day class. So this visual helps you understand the next slide, which consolidates what we offer in Albany. And while it was pointed out to me that when you look at this slide, it looks like we have a pretty good spectrum of services, if you go back to the previous slide, you can see where we fall on that continuum as far as what we can offer students. Other designated supports that we provide for our special education students, we provide speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavior support, adaptive PE, physical therapy, assistive technology, and augmentative alternative communication. So those could be provided within an IEP as not extra, but included services that a student with an IEP might need. Currently, AUSD is able to provide services to all our students, so we have not made any agreements with any of our SELPA partners to educate any of our students outside of the district. Conversely, we do have 5 SELPA placements in the district right now. We have 2 students from Emeryville, 2 students from Berkeley, and 1 student from Piedmont who are here through, it's called the North Region SELPA Placement Agreement. So we as directors get together every month and we talk about our services and what we can provide. And as a consortia, we're able to say, I need a placement for XYZ. Do any of you have that? Do you have room? And then we can start a conversation of how we can sort of leverage our resources as a SELPA. Another question was asked about the role of a resource classroom, and this is a really good question because a majority of our students are resource students, which means they have some sort of learning disability that doesn't allow them to access math or language arts as easily as a general ed student. And so in the resource class, if you think of it as not as tutoring, but as extra academic support to get them to where they need to be on grade level, then that's what the resource room provides. And that support can be given individually or in small groups. It can be given through paraeducators. It can be given through a resource teacher. There's a lot of different models that can be used within a resource classroom. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are in a special education educators shortage in the state. Special educators are very difficult to find. And when we find good ones, we want to hang on to them and treat them really well. In the event that we cannot fill a position, we contract out with staffing services. And so what you see in front of you is the list of staffing services that we're contracting with right now and the services that they provide. So the list isn't long, which we're fortunate about. We don't have that many contracted employees, but it is a need when we cannot hire through platforms like EdJoin or Indeed, where we want to hire someone as a district employee. So this is a way to bridge that gap. And in the meantime, we continue to advertise the positions in hopes that someone will step up and be the candidate that we want and that we can hire as an Albany Unified School District employee. So the question was asked, how much does it cost to educate a special education student? And I wish I could say it's XYZ dollars and it's that much every time. But because the nature of special education is so individualized and each student has that IEP or that individualized education plan designed to meet that child's specific needs. So the LAO, the Legislative Analyst Office, estimates that the cost to educate a special education student is about $22,300 compared to the cost of educating a general ed student, which is about $9,600. And so when you think about the special ed budget, you have to think about all the 333 kids, all their 333 IEPs, and what the total cost of each individual's educational program is. So I've just given you some examples, and they're actually students in Albany, but we've maintained confidentiality. So just to give you some examples of what a program might look like. Student A might have specialized academic instruction, push in, pull out through the resource program, which the LAO estimates to be about $22,300. Another student might be a speech-only student where their only service is speech. That's the only thing on their IEP. Again, that would be estimated at $22,300. Student C might be placed in a non-public school with extended school year and transportation. So you can see just the placement at the NPS or the non-public school is $46,000. And then if the IEP team feels that transportation is also a necessary service, they can write that into the IEP, which would add another $8,220. The most expensive placement that we currently have in Albany Unified School District is placement in an out-of-state residential treatment center, which with everything included, and I believe the next slide breaks it down, is about $168,000 a year. Uh-oh. I might have left. I did have a breakdown of the, I apologize. I'm going to skip to what the breakdown of the cost for the out-of-state student is. I apologize that it's not in order. And then I'll go back. So we just talked about a student that has a residential treatment center placement, and this would be the breakdown of the cost. So with the total cost being $168,000 for a school year, basic education is $168 a day, counseling is $91 a day, and room and board is $258 a day. Keep in mind, too, that they don't come home on the weekend, so that's a 7-day week for room and board. And I'm going to go back to where I was. So that's the slide that shows you the different scenarios of what a placement might cost, and those are actual placements that we have in our district right now. Okay. So the next slide talks about how the difference between revenue and cost for special education is funded. Districts receive different flows of money through different categories and different funding sources. The gap between the funding received and the actual cost of providing services has grown tremendously in recent years. Some of the reasons for that increase are more intensive support is requested and or required by the student. Costs, of course, things are getting more expensive as we go along, so costs are rising faster than funding. And there's also an increase in complaints and litigation. So that also tends to increase your budget, or your expenditures, excuse me. The next slide is, should be familiar. Ms. Kim brought this forth, I believe, at our last board meeting, and it just shows you the different funding streams on the left, and then it shows you the funding that comes in from those funding streams. The next column is the general fund contribution. In other words, that is what our general fund and our LCFF funds contribute to the special ed program to make up the difference for what it actually costs. So you can see that we bring in about $3.3 million through our funding sources for special ed. We contribute about $4.5 million from our general fund and our LCFF budget, which brings our expenditures to about $7.8 million on special ed. So when the question was asked, how much does it cost to educate a special ed student, it's very specific and it's per child, per IEP. This slide just demonstrates how the LAO's estimate of $22,300 per student for special ed, this slide really demonstrates that it is, in fact, on the average about that much to educate a special education student, keeping in mind an average is a low and a high. A question that was also another good question is, what would trigger a placement at a non-public school? And a non-public school is a specialized school. It's a special education school that is either local or out of state. It provides support for a student when the public education, the public LEA cannot provide the services. So they specialize in providing educational services for students with needs that are so exceptional the public school setting can't provide those services. And a non-public school, or an NPS, must provide appropriate special education facilities, special education or designated instruction and services when no appropriate public education is available. So it's really important to know the difference between a private school, which is a school that could be a religious faith-based school, or it could be just a school that's a privately run entity, versus a non-public school. A non-public school is a special education school. And currently, Albany Unified School District has 8 students placed at special education non-public schools, not private schools, and 2 students that are educated at out-of-state residential treatment centers. The history of the out-of-state placements, I have counts that go back to June of 2018. So in June of 2018, we had 1 out-of-state student. In December of 2018, we had that same student. In June of 2019, which just passed, we had 4 students at out-of-state placements, and 2 of those students were able to come back. And this September, we started this school year with 2 students at out-of-state residential treatment centers. So the next question is, why would a student be placed in an out-of-state facility versus a facility in California? We have some past history with some of these residential treatment centers that have given us, or have given our students, good success. So we keep those in mind if we do have to do an out-of-state placement. If the out-of-state placement, or if the placement is initiated by a crisis situation, say for example, like something that Shelley was talking about, an attempted suicide or something very intense, placement in California is a long, slow process. So if we need a student to be in a facility ASAP, we generally would have to go out of state. Bed spaces in California are very rare. California facilities can also cost upwards of $260,000. So there's also a price difference. The next slide we already spoke about, and that's the breakdown for what it costs to educate a student at an out-of-state placement. And so for special ed, and for my vision for special ed, and I feel like it's already a part of the culture here, is to create an inclusive culture. So our goal is to ensure a highly effective instructional program for all our students, which can lead to more inclusivity, where students with disabilities and families are valued as part of the school and the community. So as a newcomer to Albany Unified, I very clearly see a culture of inclusion, and I appreciate your attention. And if you have questions, now would be the time to ask.
I will start off just by saying thank you so much for that what do they call it?
SPED 101.
Yeah, Special Ed 101, because I wish that I would have seen this presentation when I first got onto the board. It was really, really informative and helps me understand Albany's program within, our district itself, within the SELPA, and then the larger picture as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to the board for questions.
Yeah, I had about 2 questions, and if you could go back to the slides where the questions came up for me, that'd be really helpful. So in the special ed revenue slide, I'm not sure where that was.
You want the questions or the revenue slide?
The revenue slide.
There you go.
Okay. When let's see, does general fund include? So when you're talking about the general fund contribution, is that the money that we get from the state as well as local taxes?
Yes.
Okay.
And no.
Oh.
So this is what, and you can see it's all marked with some form of special education notation, right? So this is the funding stream we get that's earmarked especially for special education.
From the state or from local?
From state and federal,
Okay.
right? So like, one of these mental health is federal and one of these mental health is state. So this is a combination of state and federal funds. This is what we bring in to spend on our special ed students.
From the state and from the federal government? Okay.
Earmarked for special ed. This is what we have to contribute from all the other money that we spend on all the other programs, curriculum, anything we spend on our school district. So in other words, it's like saying, I want to go shopping and I only have $35, but what I want to buy is $78. So somehow I've got to make up that $45. And that's what the general fund contribution is.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So the general fund contribution is, after we get money from the state, after we get money from local taxes, that goes into our general fund, and then that general fund, in addition to going to general
education,
goes also to fill that gap between expenditure and revenue.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And then my second question is, could you go to the contractors slide? Yes, cool. Thank you. Are those district-wide contracts or are those SELPA, the North Region SELPA
These are
contracts?
specific to Albany Unified.
Okay.
So for example, we've got a contracted RSP teacher at the middle school because we couldn't fill it with an Albany Unified employee. We tried to hire someone, we advertised the position, we couldn't find someone. So that's when we go to a contracting agency. We say, we need a resource teacher for this grade, and then they send us applications or resumes, and then we can interview that person to see if that person's a fit. It's not a substitute, but it's someone that's going to fill that spot as the employee, but it's not our employee. It's not an Albany Unified employee. So think of like a temp agency kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. I just had a couple of things. One,
Sure.
First of all, thank you for this really good report, very clear. And,
You're welcome.
And, we can all understand it. And I had asked a question, and you actually answered it as part of what the board questions asked. And I was wondering if, given the parent we had tonight that raised it about what's going to be the community role or in this as well as the boards, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in conversation with Dr. Wells and knowing that there was concern last year and more input and conversation that wanted to be held with community and staff, et cetera, I am convening a special ed committee. And right now it's sort of the juggling of the calendars to try and make sure we can get as many people there on the same night as possible. So I was in touch with June McIntyre last night at the CAC, and we talked about calendaring and different things. So I have tentatively slated the date for October 9th in the evening at 5 o'clock, and I'm just still working out the details and the logistics about how to get everyone in the same place at the same time. So definitely it is coming up, and it's definitely something we're going to do regularly.
And who do you anticipate participating?
I have some parents, and I'm trying to do sort of a broad brushstroke of different grade levels, different, maybe some parents that have RSP students, maybe some parents that have special day students, as Mr. Castillo said, maybe some board members. So the composition is still being worked on. So.
And my second question is, you may not have it tonight, but is there data to show that our program is being successful? Meaning, for example, that you are seeing, or the district can show students that are graduating from the resource program and just going into the general population program?
It's always been said that special education is not a life sentence, and our goal is definitely to transition kids out of special ed and into the general population as much as possible. We want to make sure, though, that their needs continue to be supported. So every student is different, but if you wanted to look at graduation rates or assessment results, there's information on the California Department of Education on the dashboard, which pulls up different subgroups that it's very easy to look at. It's color-coded, it's not statistical, it's like a little speedometer that's got colors across it. So certainly in another report, I could bring that information at another time. It's available.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That LCAP, or excuse me, that got to what I was about to say. That committee that you're creating in coalition with some of the other parents in the district, is that going to be intertwined with LCAP? Because I know that for instance, if like a district has 15% or more English language learners, then they have to have a separate committee that works with the LCAP committee and reviews the LCAP, the plan. So is there a way to like intertwine this with the LCAP to make sure that the work that you guys are doing is influencing the plan?
It's definitely hand in glove because LCAP deals with funding and programs. So it's something that Ms. Williams and I can discuss and come to some sort of agreement.
Maybe just to answer your question quickly, the answer is yes. And in fact, the template for the LCAP is changing for the upcoming school year. And in the stakeholder engagement section, instead of asking about with whom districts consulted, the state is asking specifically about groups that were consulted, and special education, parents of special education students are identified as a group with whom we are expected to consult as part of the development of the LCAP process. So yes, we'll be doing that.
So it's a natural partnership that will happen.
Awesome, thank you.
Is there, Ms. Fujiwara, yes, can you speak? Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Patty Fujiwara. I'm ATA co-president. One of the questions I have is about these contract providers, and I just wanted clarification. Did you say that they are still being advertised for regular, like credentialed, or once you fill the contract, you close it?
Yeah, we close it.
So these are all, these folks here all have contracts for a year?
This school year.
This school year, okay. And then the other thing I was wondering was about that, the shortfall between the state and federal funding and what the general fund contributes. Do you see any increases in any state and federal funding down in the pipeline there?
On the special
Yeah.
ed side? What happens with, at least with the SELPA funding, is that they try to, costs go up every year and money comes in a little bit less than cost. And so what the SELPA has is a flex program which tries to bring at least the SELPA contribution up to the level it was the year before. So we're never funded less than the year before. But as far as all the other state and federal contributions, I wouldn't be able to speak to that. But I do know that the SELPA tries to level it each year so that we're not getting less and less and less every year from the SELPA. They look at the number of students we have and they determine that? SELPA funding is based on the entire population of the district, not just students with special needs. So the SELPA funding is based on the 3,658 students.
And then that other funding just comes in whatever you get from the other state and federal.
I don't know, Ms. Kim, could you maybe, she's talking about
I can add one bit of information while Ms. Kim gets ready, which is the special ed IDEA funding. That is federal money, and there's been a movement to increase the IDEA budget, and Dr. Wells and I were trying to support that by asking for a meeting with Representative Barbara Lee, and we want to let her know that we really hope that she'll fight hard in Washington for increasing IDEA funding. Some of our representatives really have no idea that this gap exists and that we need more money for special ed. And so we just want to make that argument as clear as we possibly can to try to increase the federal contribution. Yeah.
Or do you want, go ahead.
I think, okay. So your question is, if the funding is based on our special ed students of number of students, is it the question, or just?
Does that change? Does it increase every year, or does costs go up?
Right. Usually that's the trend. But we will have to go back and look at those prior data, and those are something we can do. But that's the trend.
And if it increases, it doesn't increase tremendously. It kind of inches its way up. So,
Board Member Hinckley?
I wanted to ask, so I sat on the little working group that was convened at the end of last academic year. And some of the issues that came up around how paraeducators are used and how we're staffing them and how we're supporting them and how they're working with gen ed teachers, and then the challenge of, you've alluded to the staffing challenges, which don't always stop once you have someone hired. Sometimes then there are absences that create a whole ripple effect. So I guess I'd like to hear, now that you've been here for a little bit of time, your take on what are the main challenges that you hope to take on this year, and what are the goals, especially the goals you'd like to see this, did you call it a committee or a task force?
Committee.
A committee sort of take up.
I think right now my biggest challenge is it's not the quality of the paras, it's more about the attendance and the reliability, which it changes from day to day. So that's kind of one of our biggest challenges, definitely. That I can think that's the one that really comes to mind. As far as the committee, what I would want to do with the committee, and my program specialists Beth Tyler and Naida Dorado and I had a conversation about what's the purpose of the committee, what's the plan, what do we hope to accomplish, and so my first task would be to go through this presentation to have sort of a really good foundation about what special ed is in Albany Unified, and then start talking about how do we create systems where we're not so heavily reliant on paraeducators, where we come to a system that talks about creating more independence for our students, having that support when it's appropriate, but not having it be so relied heavily upon. I've come from other places where I haven't seen this many paras before, and it's hard to sustain as far as continuity is concerned. That's my biggest concern right now.
What do you think is behind the fact that we're using them more heavily than other districts? I don't mean to, you could just say, I'll answer that.
I could, just speaking from my experience in my former district, we were more about fostering independence, creating students that advocate for themselves, designing programs that created a network of support through systems versus people. And so that's kind of the main difference that I see. I want to see sunrise to sunset and see how this whole year pans out, because I really am interested to see if we start thinking about system changes, how we can create a more viable program where we don't rely so heavily on paraeducators, because really best first instruction is always by a credentialed, high-quality teacher.
Well, in addition to that, it's important to note that this is not philosophical, this is law. We're required to assist kids in developing their independence, which means we're supposed to be reducing the amount of time each year on the dependability of paraeducators.
And that's exactly my vision.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
I want to thank you again for a fantastic presentation, and we'll probably see you back sometime, maybe in the spring, to get a report on how the task force, your committee,
absolutely,
has worked out. Okay.
I would love to. I look forward to it. Thank you.
I'd like to say I have to leave right now just because I have so much homework to do, but I gave a little proposal to Clementina about the sustainability with pretty little Post-it notes about the sustainability discussion that I'd like to have on the school board. So I didn't ditch it. It's still coming.
Super. Thank you very much. And don't stay up too late with your homework.
See about that.
Okay. And that brings us to review and action. Which 12.1, independent contractor services for UC Berkeley Lawrence Hall of Science.
Good evening, Superintendent Wells, Board President Trutain, board members, community. The purpose of this item this evening is for the board to review and approve an independent contractor services agreement with UC Berkeley Lawrence Hall of Science to provide professional development to our K-5 teachers on our upcoming October Professional Development Day around next generation science standards, and also to contract with Lawrence Hall of Science to provide us services in our upcoming process around piloting and adopting instructional materials for NGSS-aligned curriculum at the elementary level specifically. I did want to address a couple questions that came up. One question from Board President Trutain was around non-discrimination language in the contract, and so I did reach out to UC Berkeley and they were able to add that, and I did bring copies of the amended contract with that language included and have copies here for board members if you would like to see that. Then the second question was asked by Board Member Duran, and it was noting that these standards were adopted in 2013, and aren't we a little behind, was the question. And so the response is that we are like very many other districts in the state. At the time that next generation science standards were approved, districts in California were also working on implementing Common Core state standards for mathematics and for English language arts. And then since that time, history, social science framework has also come on board. And so many districts are in the place that we are in terms of sort of having implemented the new standards for English language arts and math and associated curriculum, and now moving on to these other subject area. The other thing I would point out is that in our district, because we're so small and because we really enjoy and rely on so much teacher support and voice in our piloting processes, we did on purpose last year take a break from piloting because we had been piloting our K-5 teachers almost to death with units of study reading and writing, and so we wanted them to have a year off and be refreshed, and so they had plenty of warning that this year then we were going to ramp back up with our adoption efforts. So I did want to mention those two things in response to the questions. Thank you.
Are there any other board questions about this contract?
I'll move that we approve the independent contractor services agreement with the UC Berkeley Lawrence Hall of Science.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. And then we have an item for agreement for Albany High School fire alarm replacement project.
Okay, this item is to review and approve the agreement for the fire alarm project with Dan Electric. And over past year, the fire alarm in Albany High School failed, and the system is approximately about 20 years old, and the manufacturer no longer sells the part required for the maintenance. So in March 2019, the school board approved for the complete replacement for the existing fire alarm system at high school. So the plan is to have this completed by December 31st, 2019. So then the new system at the new AHS wing can be tied into this system together. So we have about 5 bids last week, and then Electric was identified as the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. The cost is about $1,074,000, and we estimate that 60% will be funded by the state through the facility hardship grant, and the 40% may be funded by the bond fund. And Rick Burr, project manager from DCA, is here this evening to answer any questions the board may have.
Board?
I have a question that may not be related to the construction itself, but what is the fire safety situation between now and December 31st? We've talked a little bit about the marshal and the guards and so forth. So
right. So currently we also still has fire watch if for any event happening at AHS after the school hours.
And will we have to pay for that through December 31st?
That is correct.
Can you remind us how much that's costing?
Right. So it's about $30 an hour, and sometimes when the event is over, certain community members involved, like over 50, or I believe big numbers, and sometimes we have to provide 3 fire watch as well per event.
Okay.
Well, okay, so I wonder, I see our DCA
Trying to think.
person here.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask a question. I'm sorry, late in coming. With Dan Electric, if they're a company that are going to be around for the future to help us out if, things happen, what relationship would there be with Dan Electric?
That's a good question, and that
Bringing up is that the reason we need a new fire system is that the one we paid for broke.
yeah, and I think that what I was going to ask is associated with that is that we used a vendor that made a system that then became quickly obsolete. All of our schools, except for the newest, the high school is our newest school, and everybody else's fire alarm works. And so we really picked a lemon. And so if Ms. Kim or if our DCA person would like to comment on what was thought about when we chose this particular system in this particular company, because $1 million is a lot of money, and we want to be sure that this fire alarm system works long term, and that we don't end up with a system that is called obsolete after just a few years.
I still am wondering why. I mean, it just feels, like you said, like we got a lemon, Now, if you go to the car auction or something, they tell you you buy this car, it might not work, but that's usually $500. But this is really expensive. It's cost us a lot of money. If this was to happen in any other circumstance, I feel like it's not our fault that they don't make the part, but we are the only ones suffering because they no longer make this part, because they installed a system that was faulty and it's not working. Have we done any additional investigation to hold them liable for this or to pay for this and then sue them for this. Like, just taking this money and spending it on it doesn't seem fair. It is really late, so I'm happy to table this and get answers to that for another time, but just throwing this money at this when we're not responsible for it and just doesn't feel fiscally responsible.
I think in order for the school to be safe, we need to have a new fire alarm system installed ASAP.
I want the school to be safe too, but I also want the kids to all have, you know, places to go and lights and books and things like that. So if we could do this and then sue the company, somebody should be held responsible for this, and it shouldn't be the students of Albany because they didn't do anything wrong, but we're spending their money on it. They have to be safe, but somebody should be held liable for this, and it's frustrating that we're just throwing all this money at this, and the company whose fault it is not being held accountable for it. When in any other aspect of life, we're held accountable for, especially when this is supposed to be safe for the kids, and it's not safe. So they did something wrong, and they put our kids in danger because of it, and they should be held accountable.
Just to respond, first of all, I really appreciate your comments because when I came on, one of the things I thought history would be our best teacher. How did we go about getting this company? And some of the things we learned is when you have startup companies who have no foundation, that's a red flag then, because some don't make it. And so how is this company different from the company of the past who sold us a limit? And I think that's a reasonable and expected question that the company that we're proposing tonight should be able to answer and respond to, because I really appreciate your comments and your frustration. I appreciate that.
I'm not sure I want to go here or towards the door. Good evening. I'm Rick Burr from Dreevy Castellanos Architects. To answer your question, I don't think there are any great answers to that question. You know, the technology has changed over several decades now. I can't give you an opinion of why it happens. Well, how do you prevent it? What do you keep from doing that? Can you sue those people? We see this a lot. It is rampant throughout the school systems all around the state. This is about the life terminology of a term for a system to go through before you have replacements. What you're getting is an updated, upgraded to the code fire alarm system. Your question about Dan Electric and where they will be, they are the installers only. They are not the service company for this fire alarm. You have a separate contractor for that monitors your system and responds to this, to the needs of the system. They simply will be installing it per the drawings and specifications. They will have a one-year warranty, so they'll be by our side for 1 year, but that's their commitment.
Is this contract only for installation, or does it include the system itself? Should we expect to see a separate contract for purchasing the system?
No, it's all part of, it has been specified. It will be purchased through Dan Electric. But,
I see, okay.
But the warranties will be borne by the supplier of the fire alarm equipment itself and the long-standing companies that build and support those, and then there's other monitoring companies besides that.
I see.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Maybe I just don't understand. Are you saying that after the year of their monitoring it, or, you know, we're insured for that part, what happens after that year if things start to fall apart or there's an issue? Do we need a new contract for that? For the sort of the maintenance, I mean, as issues come?
You'll have a regular maintenance company that will both monitor and maintain it through the years after the year warranty is up.
Is that a contract that we already have developed, or is that still to be done?
We will have to do it later on.
It would be later on.
It'll be after
through your
that.
facilities folks, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is it possible to, this is really frustrating, especially all the conversations we have about money. This is really frustrating. Is is there a possibility to either extend the warranty for longer than a year? Because that doesn't feel long enough, especially when you're fixing something that has been giving us this much trouble. A year seems like, I mean,
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. That is industry standard, and I don't know if it's purchasable or not. I couldn't give you that answer as I stand here tonight.
Yeah, I'd like to know if there's a way to extend the warranty, or if there's another company that would offer a longer warranty. This seems like it could be an issue where, like, I understand the concern to fix it right away, which I agree with, but then fix it, and then something else happens, and we end up having, a year and 3 days later. It doesn't really seem like these companies are super flexible or want to, like, jump in and just be super helpful. So then we end up spending, again and again, and then eventually they say, oh, you know what, you got to replace this whole thing. You can't keep repairing it, which is what the fire chief is going to say. He's not going to just keep letting us repair a faulty system. Eventually they're going to say, you got to replace it, which is going to cost way more than this. And then Dan gets to take his $1 million and
Another thing we learned about the old fire system is that we didn't have the ongoing, regular required maintenance that we should have been having. And this is something we will be doing and must do. And so some of it was our part and some of it was the limit. But this time, one of the other differences is that we will be having ongoing regular maintenance as required. That would be a big difference.
That's a very good point.
I mean, they were having problems with the fire alarm last year, and we heard about it, and then there was some temporary fixes involved, and we started doing the fire watch and all of this. And so this has been a long road so far. And I think that DCA has helped the district to try to pick out a system that would be compatible with the system going into the high school addition that we're working on. And I've been assured by the superintendent that they're not working with a startup company, that this is an established company. And I think that Ms. Kim has also spent time looking into this hardship funding that we can get in line for, because it is a hardship. And if we go forward with this, that we can get part of this funding back, get in the queue so that we can get this during the same fiscal year that we're in. So with that, and I have to trust the work that the district and DCA has done to try to pull us out of this hole and get us, to a place where we have a school with functioning fire alarms. So with that, I'm willing to make a motion that we pass this contract. Sure.
I just have a super quick question on how it's funded after this. I'm, for the record, totally on board with needing to get this done. But like you said, the warranty will be for 1 year, and then after that, we'll need to have a contract for regular maintenance and any repairs needed, if I've got that right. And this part of it that is not covered for this contract that's not covered by the hardship fund will be coming out of our bond funds. Do we have a plan for, or do we know what funding will be going toward that next contract that's about maintenance and repair going forward? And is that also a bond fund? Good, because Jackie's shaking her head no, because I know that Marin needs to be rebuilt and we're running out of money. So thank you.
Right, so the maintenance is the regular routine maintenance, and it will be from general fund restricted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor.
I'll second.
Can we have a roll call?
Trustee Duran?
Yes.
Trustee Hinckley?
Yes.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Vice President Doss?
Before I vote, I would like for something to, we're talking about safety. I'm assuming that this system is not the only system of its kind. So I would like for something to be in place. There's other students at other schools with this system, and I feel like at this point those kids aren't safe either. I'm happy to move forward with this, but I would like a report back of what we're gonna do. One, to hold this company accountable because the safety of our kids is paramount, and two, you shouldn't be able to just run around putting kids in danger like this. If it was anything else, it'd be an uproar. But back to my vote, yes.
Thank you. President Chutain?
Aye.
Thank you.
And we do need a motion to extend the meeting. We were scheduled to end, I think, at 9:52, and we're about at 10:15 now.
Motion to extend the meeting until 10:30.
Thank you. Okay. And so let's move through agenda items introduced by the board. I heard Board Member Duran talk about goals for the board and having some work-study sessions. But I'd like to, this is the time for board members to speak up. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay. Superintendent Wells, can you give us some options in like a Friday update for entities that we could work with for that type of board training?
Yes.
Super. Okay. And I also heard a United Against Hate resolution. I'll second that. I think all of us would second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Actually, it's a little bit earlier for the vote. We'll have to get the resolution on the agenda, but we can make that happen. Okay. I spoke about annualizing the mental health report. Would a board member care to second that?
I second it.
Okay. I'll try to get that. And regarding the issue of PE waivers, whether we need to get the policy updated and get that agendized and come back, or whether Dr. Wells needs to just look into this particular situation. I don't know. What's your feeling?
Well, a lot of times we talk about what's happening in other districts. This is happening in other districts. And the gentleman who spoke earlier brought it up at least a year ago. And I think we owe it to him to at least have the discussion, unless you think different, but we invite the public to come here and speak. He spoke twice on it. I brought it up a year ago, trying to get this on the agenda, and I'm trying again now. But I guess I need somebody else to support me.
I second
but I
it.
think the question Kim's getting at is the policy need to be changed, or is the policy not being applied correctly?
I have no idea. That's why it needs to be discussed.
Well, Madam President, I suggest I do this first. I'm scheduled to meet with the gentleman about his unique need and request, coupled with re-examining our policy and see whether or not it needed to be updated, like some of the other surrounding policies in terms of options for PE credit. So I like to be given a green light to do both, look at both. Consider a policy update and to work with the gentleman's unique needs.
How does that sound? Because if the policy needs to be updated, I would say that the proper route for that is for it to go to the policy committee, and then after they have done their update, then it comes to the board as an agenda item. So I am glad.
Or the board can just change policy themselves as well.
Yeah, but we created the committee so that we could get get staff and community input as part of the process.
Well, putting it on the agenda is doing the same thing.
I think we have the policy committee as part of a process.
But we didn't have the policy committee before, and policy got changed before as well.
Say that again.
I mean, the dude's been asking for it for over a year. If it's going to be this big of a deal, I mean, go ahead and just don't bring it up.
A board member asked to put it on the agenda, and he got a second. So what's the discussion about?
Well, I have second thoughts about my second.
Okay, well, then I second. Can we move on?
And if I could say why, I'd like to say
I
why.
think you should say why, but I think that...
You've done that before. You've backed me before, and then you get...
Well, it's okay. You know why? Because there's...
Well, I don't need you telling me, Sarah, what I need to do, okay? It's happened before where she backs me, and then all of a sudden she gets some pushback, and I can say to her what I want to say without you jumping in.
Okay, but you know what? We have norms that we agreed to, and we need
What norms do we agree to? These norms came up 3 years ago when I got on the board. I didn't agree to these norms.
Okay, you know, I don't know, maybe it's not appropriate to take a break because I'm not happy with the feeling here of the board right now, and I don't know if it's because it's late, but this is something that we need to address.
What do we need to address?
Your
Me speaking my mind? I can be angry.
The board feel personally attacked, and that we have a set of norms that we read at the beginning of every meeting.
That we have never discussed and gone over the norms to see if they need to be revised or anything. I've talked about this before. Just because something was in place on day one when I came in, now all of a sudden they're agreed upon norms?
Well, even if we are going, we can go back to the norms. According to the norms, a board member would like to have something placed on the agenda. That board member got a second. So respecting that board member and his item, after it gets a second, it's supposed to just go on the agenda. And then we discuss it once it's on there, not discussing if it should go on there or not. He asked for it to go on there and got a second, just like the other 3 items that everybody else suggested before.
Okay, what I'm trying to do is respect the committees that we've created, and also to respect the judgment of our superintendent. So what if our policy is solid, but there's something wrong with the application, then Dr. Wells might be able to resolve this. And if he looks at the policy and something's wrong with it, it's out of date, it's not responsive to the needs of our community, then, so I just was trying to give him like a 2-week window.
I think that he can still, I think that everything you said can still take place. Still respect the committee, still respect Dr. Wells. He can take the time to do the investigation. In the interim, if a board member asks for something to go on the agenda and he or she gets a second, then it should just go on there like everything else. There's some things that we agree upon, and then, ooh, yep, let's put that on the agenda. They get a second, and they go on there real smooth. But then sometimes there's things where some people agree and some people don't agree, and it's kind of like we vote right then instead of it going on the agenda and doing it the proper way.
I could speak to, since I'm the one that
Absolutely.
changed my mind, and I did it once before as well, and we just went on. So there's already a precedent set for somebody pulling back their second if they so choose, okay, first. And second of all is that I really like to listen to people. I don't just want to make a decision and hold firm if in fact there's other thoughtful discussion. And in this case, I agreed with Jacob because I remember this parent coming, and he's been here more than once, and I've wanted to address the issue, the PE waiver issue, before. And so that's why when Jacob said that, I automatically wanted to support that. On the other hand, and I should know because I serve on the policy committee, that's really where we have been, as you've seen throughout the past year, we have really been moving. And the assistant superintendent has been really good at having her meetings and bringing all the recommendations from that committee. And we do try to work so that it's not just us as the board. I mean, we try to be collaborative and include people, and our committees have been a really positive way of doing that, and that's historical. It's not. I'm not talking about us, starting that, but that's important. And so when I think it was Kim or Sarah, I don't know which one, mentioned that hit me that, well, that is true, and I also participate on that committee, and I realize how we have great input, from everybody involved in it, and that includes staff, teachers, and it includes the district office, and it includes parents, and board members. 2 of us go, so that's really the process that we have set up. And so, that's why I realize, well, maybe it should go. I mean, it makes every sense, because that's what we have been doing.
Well, I agree with everything that you said, and I don't think that placing this item on the agenda and then figuring out all the logistics at a later date take away from anybody's respect or the work that has been being done. Because there are other items that people say, oh, we should put this on the agenda or put that on the agenda, and I feel like, oh, wow, we've already kind of done that work. But out of respect for the other members and what they want to see on the agenda, once it gets a second, the pushback seems unfair. You can change your vote, and if Sarah makes a compelling statement and you want to change things around, then I think that you should do that. As soon as you agreed to do that, I was going to just give a second anyway, so that we could again move on and respect every board member as they place items on the agenda. I have also experienced times where I would like to have something on the agenda, and instead of it just going on the agenda, once I get a second, there's like a lot of pushback. And I just don't do that to everybody else. Whether I agree with what you're putting on the agenda or not, I don't do the pushback, because we're all trustees here, and so.
I'm sorry, if I could just say, what pushback? I mean, I didn't get pushback from anybody here. I got some rationale of a process that we have here. I, as the board member.
No, Jacob got the pushback instead of just getting his item placed from the bin to be put on. Once he said, like, I'd like to see this on the agenda, then you gave him the second. But then instead of us just moving on to the next thing, he got pushback. And what I'm saying is that once he said that, and then once he got the second, that should have been the end of it. Why was there the pushback? We had just done 3 items previous to that, and there was no pushback because the president agreed with those 3 items, and so did the other members. So there was no pushback. But once the members didn't agree, there was pushback. But that's not how the system works, because we don't vote right then when people put stuff on the agenda. But that's the same thing that happened when I tried to put the breakfast program on the agenda. I had to do it 3 separate times because there was pushback, because everybody wasn't in unison right away. But that's not how it works, according to the rules that I just went over in this 6-hour training.
Okay, well, I want to say that it's clear in my experience on the board that some items are definitely in the realm of authority of the board, and they just need to get agendized. And it also seems to me that when we have set up specific committees to deal with other items of business, that the proper route for things is for them to go to the committee. One thing that I didn't think about was that we could agendize this item as review and discussion, and then we could decide, if necessary, to send it to the policy committee. So I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about, and that's just my fault because it's late, I was thinking that if we agreed to see this policy, we'd be having one of those long policy documents up on the screen again, where 5 people would be trying to wordsmith, each sentence of this document, and we've done that before, and it takes hours, and it's not a proper use of board time. So that's what I was envisioning, and that was what I was trying to avoid. So I think we can agendize this item, as review and discussion, and then hopefully the board will decide if it does need work to send it to the agenda, to send it to the policy committee and have them work it over before it comes back to us.
I don't know what's going to happen. I just want to respect the fellow trustees' agenda item.
Just in terms of protocol, the motion is still alive. There was a first and a second. So the motion is still alive. The president could at some point call for the vote. It's either going to die or survive.
Well, it's gotten a second, and so we should agendize it as review and discussion. Okay, but Board Member Hinckley, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, one of the reasons to send it to the policy committee immediately is to speed it up, so that instead of it coming to us and sending it to the committee, we send it to them first, which might make things go faster. But I think Brian's right that we have a process where if two people want to put it on the board agenda, it goes on the board agenda. I have something else to say after we're done with this item.
Okay, let me see if there's any other items. The special ed task force, that came up as a request from a community member, but that seems like that's already in process. So so I don't think that it doesn't need to come to us for approval for that, because we heard from a director that is happening.
I just want to clarify, that is Dr. Wells, you can correct me if this is a misstatement of it, but what the Director of Special Education talked about was a stakeholders group in special education. And what I was suggesting, in addition to that, or as part of it, is to create a committee, a board committee, like the ones that you have already been assigned to or signed up for, that is specific to special education. Because, to quote Dr. Wells at a previous time, you mentioned, this is not exactly the same, but it is similar, that tell me about your values all day long, and I might still not know what your values are. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what your values are. Same thing with the committees. If I don't see special education in the committees for the Board of Education, that signals to the special education parents and the students and the community that special education students are second-class citizens. So that's why I'm proposing that that you have a committee specific for special education, so that the students who go through that program benefit from the stated mission of the school district.
Could we ask Veronica to report back on the committee after it's met a few times, and that they take up this question of whether it makes sense for them to be a board-appointed committee in the future?
Yes.
Okay, and that.
No, we have two things. I have something and she has the
okay, yeah.
I think I had put it out on the questions, so I don't know if it needs to be agendized, which was the staff developing a plan as to when they're going to move back to Albany, because we miss them so much, and it would also help our finances. So, and I got a response, but I'm not sure if it has to be an agendized item or not.
I put it in the issues bin, but I don't think it needs to be an agendized item. I think that we just had this work study tasking our superintendent with all of these ambitious goals for the year. It's in the issues bin, and so he's aware of it, and I think he feels the same way. But if we can take care of, well, if he's able to develop the plan, then we'll put it on the next available meeting. But I don't know when that would be. I think it might be spring before he has time to get to that. Okay. I don't know. Dr. Wood, do you want to?
I could just say that we just moved to the building, and I've been here 3 months, and I can tell you that I would love to be in Albany, because I feel like I'm going back and forth 10 times a day and sometimes feel disconnected. there's not many options right now, but we can explore what kind of options and look at some timetables, because the big issue is where.
And I don't know if, also, I had asked a question about this and got some response, but I don't know if it has to go further. Also, in thinking about the finances, one of the issues I had thought about is if my understanding is that the board members can receive health benefits. And I was thinking, is that a sort of a right that we get, or is it a privilege? And looking at finances, whether we want to look at that issue as well.
I don't know how much we want to look at that, but you know, as public officials, they do come with a number of different benefits. The kind of time and energy that school board trustees put in, and they don't get paid for it. And then to look at the few or little benefits they get, I don't know whether or not we want to spend our time with that. It goes back to something you said, Clementina. That can morph into something of 80% of our time, or do we want to spend 60+% of our time around what's best for students? And I think we want to do the latter, because you guys get nothing near of what you deserve. And so the few benefits you get, to have them on the table, to say, hey, let's take them, I don't know that if that's the best use of our time. That's just me. You asked me, I'm just sharing you how I feel about it.
Okay, the other thing is from the student, Michaela, who wanted to mention that she would like to see the green team and the climate action actually become a board agenda item and not being used as the spotlight for the school, because spotlights usually happen for Albany High down the road, and she's very concerned that this is a more pressing issue and would like to see it brought to the board and in a way that's more interactive than the spotlights are. So she would like to request that it become an agenda item, and I could read what she said specifically. Review and discuss item scheduled to have the Green Team, the Climate Action Committee, and other community members to propose sustainability measures. Also, and then she mentioned it's not, also it's important, this is not a school spotlight, and then she gives those reasons.
Well, I'm gonna push back a little bit here too, because I think that these groups and these clubs, you know, they might have a lot of ideas, but if you don't have if you don't have administration, and administration, as you know, because you were a principal, has all of the daily challenges to think about, you know, so the administration knows, you know, that the kids aren't using the recycling bins properly, and they know that it's, you know, that they've tried for years to do this or to do that, and that at their school, you know, that it's not, that it's not working, or I don't know, but to me, to have these groups come in and to have the board sort of jump over not just the site administration, but also the district administration about what we're going to do on our sites is not the right protocol. I don't think it's the way to do things right. So I want to hear the students' ideas, but I want to do it in a way that we are able to agree on something that is really going to be sustainable and that staff will be able to support. Board Member Hinckley.
So my understanding of what Michaela wanted to talk about was what could the district be doing to fight climate change, or I don't know, it's too late for me to come up with the right words, but I think she wanted something more ambitious than just, I think we should be sorting the recycling better. And I think this is an interesting time to have that conversation in a board meeting, because the city is actually in the process of adopting its climate climate adaptation something. Thank you. And so I think it would be nice as a board, as a district, to take this up as a piece of conversation that doesn't have to be framed in a way that is putting pressure on site administrators or staff, but is instead, we could invite Michaela. I know there are teachers who are doing a lot to use recyclable markers or who are educating their kids about climate stuff. When I walked by the middle school the other day, there were, Ms. Georgeson had a climate strike protest going on Brighton, yeah, with the first and second graders. So maybe we could do it, and I think a spotlight is not quite right because there's no room for discussion, but I think if we could have a sort of review and discussion of opportunities for the district or the school community to participate in Albany's attempts to address the climate challenge, that would be an interest, and maybe it works, I don't know what the right name for it is, but I think it would be a great piece of a board meeting, and I don't think it has to be framed in a way that is.
I second.
I think there would need to be a staff sponsor.
Like a teacher?
A teacher, the teacher who's the rep of the club.
But we as a board put agenda items on. I mean, we make the suggestions, and she as a board member is requesting that this be an agenda item, and she got a second from Brian.
What if we ask Michaela to help us figure out who's going to actually run the sort of presentation part, if you want to call it, of the discussion? She could identify a teacher, some other student leaders. I mean, part of, Friday was the youth climate strike, right? The young people are leading this. I don't want to sort of box them into, oh, you have to have, a grown-up present it. I think
no, just so, well,
for is
also the city, they just put climate change was on their agenda as an agenda item as well. And I mean, we work collaboratively. Ooh, it is like.
And actually, it's the same. They're meeting Monday, October 7th, which is unfortunately the day we meet at the same time as them to, again, review their climate action plan.
It sounds like you're willing to write up the backup.
Sure.
Okay.
All right, and
we got it.
I second that. And
You should do it. You have the notes.
but then Sarah, also you wanted to say something.
Yes. So I think I'm going to try to frame this as an agenda item, and I don't know if it's open or closed agenda, but and I don't really know how to say this, but here goes. I think we need to have a discussion of our board norms. We have a board member who's acknowledged that he doesn't buy into them. We have a board member who has tonight and on other occasions, in my opinion, violated them by personally attacking other board members. And I would, and it may be that others of us have similarly violated norms, but I think it's important, and I think it's time for us to agendize a discussion on this.
I definitely second that. I think this is key to our, first of all, operating together effectively. And if we don't have a discussion and either act like it didn't happen or we just ignore it, it's going to come up over again. And I want, as I've stated before, I want us to be successful, and we need to be a team, and we need to be able to hear each other and not walk out of a session. I mean, this is a meeting. And so all the different parts and actions that we do, and I remember Dr. Wells at summertime when we had a session at the end of a work session at the end of the summer, it was about, he had mentioned at the time that we are the role models for students, for the students that luckily left before it happened. And yeah, so there will be others who will see it, and so this is just vital to our being effective, and we really can't go much further if we don't work on this together as a team?
Board norms are not a closed session item. I don't think they can be discussed in closed session. They're not a personnel or a negotiated item. So this would be an open session.
Like a Saturday workshop or something like that?
ASAP, please.
We can work on trying to get that scheduled.
I would like to add one comment about that. The great thing about having it in closed session, even if in open session, even if closed session were an option, is that once each and every one of you sign on to those, you cannot say later, I did not agree to those norms. So you have to abide by them, all of you, whether you're here or not.
That's a good point. You know, and I mean, just like any of our other actions, you know, that we take on the board, the community, you know, they will hold us accountable. I don't want to say too much about it because the board member left, but I think it's important for us to have that discussion. I think that sometimes we're going to talk about stuff where we agree, and sometimes we're going to talk about stuff where we disagree, but it's important that regardless of how that goes, that we all show each other respect. So I think it's important to have that conversation.
And on that, we're adjourned.
I got to have the last word. Look at that.
What do you want me to do? Take a picture?
You said you were going to you said you were going to, somebody asked you to do something, and I'm happy to help you.
Julie?
You know, I don't know how much is required. Is it kind of sort of like what they provide us with, an information?
Frank is your first